Folks, we do have some seats at the front, and also when you do come forward to speak at the podium, make sure to identify yourself, speak clearly into the microphone. Thank you.
Good evening, folks. I'd like to call the September 12th, 2023 regular meeting of the Flagler County Planning and Development Board meeting to order. Madam Clerk, if we can have a roll call, please.
Michael Boyd,
Here.
Timothy Connor.
Here.
Jack Corbett,
Here.
Heather Haywood.
Here.
And we don't know anything about Mark Langello. Anthony Lombardo
Here.
and Fernando Melendez.
Present.
All right.
Will everyone please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which is stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. No Mark yet? There he is. The Planning and Development Board observes rules established by case law and by board policy for the conduct of its public hearings. The audience should refrain from clapping, booing, or shouts of approval or disagreement. To avoid potential legal ramification and possible overturning of a decision by the courts, a public hearing must be fair in three respects: form, substance, and appearance. We will observe the following time limits. Staff will have 10 minutes for their presentation. The applicants has 15 minutes for their presentations, and public comments will be limited to 3 minutes and extended to 5 minutes if someone is speaking on behalf of a group. And of course, 10 minutes if minutes each will be provided to the applicant for any rebuttal comments and to the staff for any closing comments. We're going to go with item number 3, and this is a legislative not requiring disclosure of ex parte communication. This is application 3348. This is a small-scale future land use map amendment from mixed use, low intensity, low medium density to commercial. What did I say that right? Low intensity, low medium density to commercial, high intensity. Mr. Adam, can you please give us the rundown?
Yes, sir. And the property is shown here on the display and also within your packets. And so these two parcels together form this request. This one's 1.15 acres in total, south of 18th Road on the west side of North Ocean Shore Boulevard. Let's see. So from a future land use map perspective, we've got the mixed use, low intensity, and then bordering it then to the west side's residential, low density rural estate. On the opposite side of North Ocean Shore is our Greenway parcel conservation area that's there. And then the zoning setup that we have, west side consistent with that residential low density. We have the R1 zoning. You have the RC all along the strip there on the frontage along North Ocean Shore. And then opposite side is the plan unit development consistent with what had been part of the Hammock Dunes DRI, but now part of our Greenway. Flood zones, you do have a bit of this in the shaded X. That is not a special flood hazard area. Portion along the roadway frontage is in Zone X outside of the special flood hazard area, so no concerns from a flood management perspective there. And then consistent with that, your soils, this is showing Bimini for the majority at the back end, that back west half, and then that front portion being part of a Cocoa-Bulow complex, which you expect to see beachside. We see a lot of that there. And then no wetlands for the parcel. And then I've got my analysis and included this within the packet. And what this really boils down to, this and then the zoning, the rezoning side of this, is what you're able to do with the land. And so clearly what the applicant's looking at with this application and the companion rezoning, the next item on the agenda, 3349, and then in some respects, the other two similar requests that are here on the agenda is what's in play as far as the capability of what you can do with this as far as the permitted uses in the end result in the zoning. So under the RC, you have the list of special exception uses along with some specifically prohibited uses. Gave you a copy of that within your packet for reference. And so you've got that RC set of zoning requirements. And then also then the C2. And so the distinction here being, without getting too deep in the weeds on this as far as zoning, but that's what this boils down to, is what you can do in one zoning district versus the other. This request, though, then being limited, though, to a legislative decision related to the land use, planning board then reviewing the slides that I'm presenting now, and along with that, then my presentation for the recommendation that's made to the Board of County Commissioners specific for this side of the application, 3348. At the top, and I'll have this on each of the slides, keep in mind that you have this limiting factor that comes in from the beginning, that if you're under the mixed-use low, 50% of the development area is the maximum that you could devote to a commercial use, and so that's 25,000 square feet. Under the commercial high intensity, you're limited to a 0.4 floor area ratio, and so it actually decreases the available area that can be utilized for commercial purposes. I think there's some design to this because the idea would be that you're actually more intensive on the permitted uses once you get to your underlying zoning, and so you'd have an argument then that you'd have less area available within that future land use category within which you could devote that commercial use. Just to be real clear, though, here, by it referring to a 0.4 floor area ratio, it's not the amount of the site that's devoted to that as much as it's the commercial utilization. So you could build up. The idea here is that floor area is what we're trying to measure, and so that you could build into a multi-story scenario and have a very limited footprint, but you could have a fairly robust commercial use by having that up to 20,000 square feet in this commercial high intensity. And so what I've used then throughout the analysis is that 20,000 for the 0.4 floor area ratio, utilizing then on the opposite side for the land use side up to 8 units that could develop. And so you'll see that throughout this. And so you'll have the talk about the decrease in the available square footage. First off, 5,000 less square feet between the mixed use low and the commercial high intensity. That's how the math works out. And then 19 fewer persons, because in the commercial high intensity, there is no residential density that's assigned. For transportation impacts and lacking a specific use, I tried to hobble together a convenience store use. And when you think about it, and I included in the report and talked about this, it doesn't really make much sense in the analysis. We are obligated to provide the highest, most intense use for our review of these items here. And what I noted here is that I haven't seen yet, maybe I should fix this though, because now Buc-ee's has kind of changed the entire world that we live in. But usually your convenience store is right around 6,000 square feet. I had to do my math. I had some examples I provided. And so that they're significantly less than 16,000 trips per day. And the other part to note here is that A1A itself does not have a trip generation that's close to this. It's more right around 9,000 trips. So realistically, we wouldn't expect this to develop that way, but absent an identified use, and again, there's no obligation to identify use at this point, but absent identified use, I have to evaluate the request for what would be the most onerous use, and I applied the convenience market as how it's referred to in the ITE manual. And with that scenario, generate 16,000 trips and an additional 16,865 trips as we provide the analysis here. Potable water, and that's using the same example. Here it would be a difference of 1,372 gallons. And you think about that, that's probably about right. That's based on water closets Car wash example, if this was to develop as a car wash, and I'll do the same explanation on the other one, there is some expectation of recycling of the water that would happen. So that would potentially end up having us maybe around the same amount of usage. It's difficult to say at this point how that would end up playing out, but again, the highest use that I'm putting it, comparing it back to is convenience market, and that would then result in additional 1,372 gallons daily. Sanitary sewer has a similar profile, increase of 862 gallons over the residential that would be permitted, the 8 units. Solid waste, I think that's on par with what you'd expect also. Convenience store type convenience market would produce an additional 45 pounds of solid waste as compared to the residential units that would be possible here. Parks and Recreation impacted just from the standpoint of the population itself, 19 persons would be the reduction then in the demand on the recreation. And then what you would expect, not having a residential component, you'd have a decrease in the students. 1.91 students, haven't seen 0.91 students yet, but it's on that aggregation number that we put that together. And so there would be a reduction then from eliminating the residential component. So you wouldn't have a student generation that would be associated with this. Note also that the student generation rate now is identified as a student yield factor is basically, I think it works out to be 0.239, just over 1 for every 4 houses. So just under that. Math challenge today. Again, 1.15 acres, that amendment from mixed-use low to commercial high intensity. We have that language that we're kind of looking at. It's in the plan right now. This quote that's here is that mixed-use low intensity, and that gives you the range that's provided in the comprehensive plan, in the future land use element, that gives you your parameters under the mixed-use low scenario. No intended uses identified. Parcel is proximate to commercial uses, and it is at an intersection. And the FLUM amendment is linked to the rezoning request. So the application 3349, the next one, if the FLUM amendment does not occur, then the rezoning cannot occur. And so one of the things I think that I tried to reflect in the report on the land use side, and then in some ways reflected also in the zoning, is what do we anticipate these things to ultimately look like? If we had the mixed use low in play, special exceptions would be required for the retail and office components should those with the RC zoning. And so with both of those consistent together, you'd have, in theory, either a single-family residential unit on each of those frontage parcels, because that is the only permitted use that's allowed in the RC zoning, or you'd end up having a special exception, retail or office use. Again, I don't want to get so deep into the zoning side of this, but realize that these two run in tandem. It's difficult to do otherwise here because that's clearly what the applicant is seeking, is they're seeking permission to be able to do a commercial use basically without coming back for the special exception that would be required within a mixed-use low with an RC mix. So your action on this, specific to the land use side of the equation, 3348, on this application alone, your decision then is the weighing of the factors as far as the demonstration on the part of the applicant of whether or not they've first met the application requirements, and second, if their request is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Beyond that, I would caution you on going any further as far as permitted uses. Again, realizing what I just said, because it's difficult to divvy these out, but I think any discussion of uses, onerous uses, things that could come in with C2 really comes into play in the next application, the rezoning under 3349. Realizing also, to belabor the groundwork that you have here, is that you do have this as a legislative item. There's a fairly large playing field for you with this, where you don't have specific requirements that you're applying here other than comp plan consistency is really what you're looking at in your recommendation. And so you could, in fact, just say that I don't like it. And that's a justification. You don't have to give necessarily reasons for your recommendation here as you would have to under a rezoning, or specifically as you would under a variance or a special exception, as we've had those before. It's the difference between legislative and quasi-judicial, and I won't say much more. Maybe I'll look to Sean after I get done with the options available to you to clarify anything I've come up with here. But that gives you those three options. The one for approval, recommending approval to the Board of County Commissioners, realizing again, you as the planning board reviewing these applications, providing that recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners that ultimately has the decision-making authority on these. First option, approval of that change from mixed-use low-intensity, low to medium density to commercial high-intensity, finding that the amendment is consistent with the Flagler County Comprehensive Plan. Second option, denial, recommendation for denial of application 3348, and then your grounds for the denial would be that it's not consistent. Again, not having any obligation to go into any greater detail there other than you just feel it's not consistent. And then the third would be a continuance, and that continuance would be if there's something specific that you need from staff or from the applicant that we haven't provided here, or a question that's raised as part of the public hearing that requires more research. And we'd ask then that that be continued to the next date, next meeting date, and then we'll come back and try to address that at a future meeting date. With that, I'll close, await any questions or comments, submit my report for the record, and then I'll look to Mr. Moylan to, and I think he's saying everything's good right now, sir. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Adam. Before we go to the applicant or owner, do any of the planning board and development board members have any questions or comments to staff?
I just have one question for him. Adam, I didn't see it in there, maybe I missed it. What's the difference in setbacks between a C2 and an RC?
I didn't get into that with this because I didn't.
I know, but
kind of
just,
intentionally.
I mean, that's where this is going, so I just thought we'd just touch
I think
that base
I'll
with it.
probably say the obvious thing for at least both will have similar buffer requirements. And so I'd say probably less is going to be important on the setbacks as much as you're going to have in play on both of these a 40-foot landscape buffer that's required off of the frontage along A1A. As the example, both situations in the current mixed-use low or the proposed commercial high-intensity, both would have a minimum 40-foot buffer requirement because of the parcels being within the scenic A1A overlay. The separation that would be needed from a commercial structure to an existing residential remains at 50 feet. You know, that's not changed by this. That's actually within the overlay district where it talks about that. So regardless of the zoning, or the land use, that would be in play. There would also be uncomplimentary buffers that would be needed around the perimeter of the property. I can't quote those. I think it's 20 feet with a 10-foot minimum landscaped area within the 20. So the quick answer I've got for you is much of that stays the same, so that even if you look and you see a specificity under RC with your minimum setbacks, and C2, and you see a distinction there, I don't know if that's really going to be much of I've said it before, it's a distinction without a difference, because I think much of what you have here is going to be that controlled by the overlay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any comments?
Not really a comment or question. Adam, could you go back to the zoning map where the colors are, and are you able to zoom out for us? I just want to see how far the RC.
Not on this. I can pull it up though. Put the zoning on. So here is our subject, two parcels. And so then, and to give you some frame of reference, not the next application, the next two applications, 5 and 6 are here at 17th and A1A. And so the subject parcels here at 18th and A1A. And so let's see, let me zoom out one more time. The red on this graphic under zoning is going to be your C2 zoning. Your pink or your lighter color there is going to be your your existing RC.
Thank you.
Then just to make sure I'm covering all my bases here, since we are under land use, let me go ahead and just turn on the land use again for you. And so you do have commercial high intensity. This is going to be the Publix, and then the Coquina Motel, and then your mixed use low. So you've got some areas there where we have some potential inconsistency between the zoning and the land use.
Do any other board members have any questions or comments for staff? Okay, seeing none, would the applicant or the owner like to come up and present, please? State your name.
Good afternoon, folks. Vincent Sullivan on behalf of applicant with Chimento Law. Just essentially wanted to reiterate what the staff report suggested, that this is an actual net decrease in commercial square footage that would be permitted on this property. So we're asking for less commercial buildable space here in the Hammock. We understand that the Hammock doesn't want to grow large. They don't want to become a big city. That's part of the consideration that was taken into making this application and requesting this future land use change and the subsequent rezoning. Secondarily, you did hear from staff that there will be a reduction in school-age children and a net reduction on our parks and recreation facilities. Now, one comment we've been hearing through the community is the owner's name. The applicant is Star Car Wash LLC. I want to be very clear, as we discussed this during TRC with county planning staff, that the site simply isn't big enough to put a car wash on. It's no sanitary sewer is available at this site currently, which would require us to get a DEP permit. And that appears to be the largest concern, is we don't need another car wash. There's already so many going up here in the county. I'm here to tell you that physically, it's not feasible as this property sits to construct a car wash. The only reason that this property is owned by that corporate entity is for tax reasons. There is currently no intention to develop this property as a car wash. There is also no current intended designation. The allowances under the COM2 designation provide the property owner the ability to do preliminary homework as opposed to going through the special exception process that's currently required under the RC zoning. Y'all very well know that it requires us to do a special exception. It's about a 50% complete plan. We have to tell you where we plan on putting the lighting, things like that. Moreover, you still got the scenic A1A overlay. Regardless of what happens, whether it goes through special exception or you folks agree to recommend, as we're asking for, the future land use change, whatever the use is still comes back to this board. So just because we change the future land use designation today doesn't mean that this board or the county commissioners are never going to see this project or this applicant again, because we'll have to come back for a development approval permit. We're going to have to come back and show site plan and show that we are in compliance with the tree code, in compliance with the scenic A1A overlay corridor, and all the other items in the land development code. So as we just saw a moment ago, we see that there are a number of commercial uses in this area. We believe the change in the future land use and subsequently the rezoning, which is our next application, brings this property in harmony with the surrounding uses and propels forward the A1A scenic overlay that suggests that this is the appropriate corridor that we should cluster the commercial uses out here on the island. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman?
You have any questions?
Mr. Sullivan, I'm going to probably phrase this to Adam, Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, if a site is this size, is that a staff review or is that a planning board review of a site plan?
It is a staff review,
Okay, it still will be reviewed by the county,
correct?
but it would not be in a public hearing review. Okay, that's the only thing you mentioned that. I just wanted to make sure that I'm not missing anything. I think that was probably an inconsistency.
My apologies.
Okay, thank you.
Do any other board members have a question for the applicant? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
At this time, your name, please?
Dennis Baer on behalf of Hammock Civic Association.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I think you have to open up to the public before. Mr.
I apologize. I was just a bit of a hurry. I wanted to rebut some of the things.
Thought you was with him.
Apologize.
Okay, so at this point, we'll open it up to the public. If anybody would like to come up and comment, please state your name and where you live.
My name is Jody Bollinger. I live at 5648 North Ocean Shore Boulevard. First of all, Mr. Langello, thank you for clarifying the fact that since the parcel's under 5 acres, it would not come back to y'all. It would only go to the TRC. So thank you for clarifying that. I wanted to read some policies from the coastal management element of the comp plan. Policy E112 says, within the coastal area, development in areas of native vegetation will be limited to low-density mixed-use or low-density residential. The parcel we are discussing, the 1.15 acres, if you were to go out A1A and look, that is an area of maritime hammock, which does happen to be native vegetation. Policy 118 says, in balancing growth and coastal resources, selected applications of a variety of mechanisms shall be used, including but not limited to. If you look up that policy on the comp plan, there are probably about 8 different mechanisms, but one of them is limited density and land use intensity. Policy E323, Flagler County's recreation and open space element shall designate scenic roads, and future land use map shall establish land uses that are consistent with the goal of preserving the natural beauty and scenic vistas along these routes. I feel that these policies support keeping the land use RC, and I know we're talking now about future land use, but also keeping the future land use as mixed use, low intensity. These policies do not support in any way changing the future land use to commercial high intensity. I also did want to mention that if it's changed to commercial high intensity from RC, that any development under 5 acres would not come back to this board, and we look to this board to look at special exceptions to make sure that they are compatible with the use in the hammock. Also, the argument about the intersection, if you look at that intersection, this particular piece would be the only C2 property. To the north of 18th Street are 2 single-family homes. To the west of that property is rural residential, and to the east happens to be the Malacomper Greenway. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't mean to step on Mr. Bear. I think you were next, and I didn't mean to step on your, I just wanted to make sure that it was clear that we were in public comment, because
Okay.
We'll let him come up after the lady. Name and where you live?
It's Pam Hathaway. I'm a resident of the Hammock. And first of all, I want to thank the A1A Scenic Highway, A1A River and Sea Trail. They put together a very, very, very good analysis of this, and I hope you all have that in your packet and you read that. That really does emphasize what we here in the Hammock think of our property. The Hammock is a very unique piece of property in Flagler County. It does not need additional commercial heavy use. Now, I'm glad that the gentleman who is now the owner, I guess, representing the owner of the property, indicated there be no car wash on that piece of property. But what prevents him from going ahead and selling that property with a C2 designation to somebody who might put something that's very heavy industrial use there? So that's one reason to deny this application. And the applications that are coming up. This isn't just for my comments are just for all 4 of the applications that are listed on the property this time. I went through, as you can see, I went through everything that was listed in your packet, and Mr. Chimento's letters, they all referenced other properties in the area that are similar to C2. JT's is not similar to a C2. It is a restaurant with, it's a great restaurant. Hammock Gardens, which is to the south of them, is they have trees there. They don't have any heavy use of any heavy commercial use. To the north is Hammock Wine and Cheese, which is now Bartlett's. It's, again, a little restaurant. And the Bronx House, they tried very, very hard to make their building look, you know, like our community, like the Hammock. I don't know how many of you guys live in the Hammock, but it is a very unique piece of property there. And just in closing, because I only have 35 seconds, I just want to read, and many of you will recognize this song. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. They took all the trees and put them in a tree museum, and they charged the people $1.50 just to see them. Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? They paved paradise and put up a parking lot. Don't do that here, please.
Thank you, Ms. Hathaway. I would appreciate if we refrain from the clapping.
Hard act to follow.
Your turn.
Dennis Bear on behalf of the Hammock Civic Association. As Mr. Mingle pointed out, this is a quasi-legislative decision. In other words, the fairly debatable standard applies because really you're establishing policy if you approve this future land use map amendment. You're saying, okay, now we want to put C2 not just here, but on the other side of the intersection. The same analysis would apply. If you look at or high-intensity commercial, if you look at the two examples that Adam showed, the Publix, I don't know how many of you were here. I think Mr. Connor was here and had his office up in the area. That went through such an extensive degree of review before they were allowed to build on that property. Here, if you go forward with what's being talked about, there will be no additional review by you or the Board of County Commissioners if they get this future land use map designation as well as the C2 zoning. So as a matter of public policy, is that what you want? We heard from the applicant that, it's going to be less of an impact because we'll have 19 fewer people in the county. But if you look at 20,000 square feet of commercial, which is what Mr. Mangle said would be allowed, that's up to 400 parking spaces. If you look at the overhead that Mr. Mangle had before, the number of trips for the existing mixed-use low density is 75.44 trips a day. The net increase, if you allow commercial high intensity, is a net increase of 16,865.31 trips per day. Is that what you want as a matter of public policy? I sat on the original long-range planning board back in the 1980s when there was nothing up here. We used to go camping on the end of 16th Road because there was nothing up there. I know how much it's changed, but our policy in requiring the RC in this area is you would have the small commercial uses like, JTs, like the nursery, but all the higher intensity commercial uses would go across the river on Palm Coast Parkway, Palm Coast, and across the highway, across the bridge in Flagler Beach. So RC was put there for a very specific purpose, as was the low intensity. The other thing that has not been done with this particular application is that there is no traffic analysis that has been provided, which is usually required for a future land use map application, and that's what's always been required for other projects that have come before. There's been some comments back and forth that, it's not technically required by the code, but why all of a sudden is it not being required for a project that ultimately could add 16,000 trips per day on scenic A1A? Most of my other comments are going to come back to the rezoning if you approve the future land use map amendment. But as was pointed out by the prior speaker, there are a number of coastal management element policies. She read E.1.1.2, E.1.1.8 also applies, limiting density and land use intensity in these high hazard coastal areas. So this to me is not a good decision. We would recommend that as a matter of public policy that you deny the future land use map amendment. The applicant has plenty of other uses that they can make with the property that are more consistent with the neighborhood. They can come in for a special exception like you required for Hammock Harbor and a lot of the other development up in the Hammock. Why are we changing the standards for this particular project? There's good policies in place. You all should be allowed to review it, and the public should be allowed to comment. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bear, just so I have clarity, I noticed that we had the time change. Were you representing a group tonight?
Yes, Hammock Civic Association.
Okay, so I assume that a lot of the people here were then letting you make their comments? Is that what was going on tonight?
That is correct. If people, I'd request not duplicating comments, but some people, particularly, I know there's some property owners that own property in proximity to this project. I think they would like to have some input as
I mean,
well.
the only reason I say that is because I want to give, personally, I know the whole board wants to give everyone their fair shot, but we've got 4 of these on this particular item to come up, and if everyone in the room comes up and does this and says the same thing over and over, it's not going to help the cause, it's just going to make the night go longer, so I just wanted to make sure.
Mr. Langello, my intention was for the next matter, a lot of it I just say ditto, because I think I've made the same concerns would apply to the other future land use map amendment that we have concerns with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other property has its own, they each stand alone because they're different. But like I said, on this item, I'm just asking the audience if Mr. Bear represents you, and if you don't have anything new to contribute, I don't think it's going to help the cause by just coming up and reiterating the same thing. That's all. All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Langello, for clarifying that. And I will ask, do we have anyone that would like to come up and comment? Please state your name, sir, and where you live.
I'm Andy Belinsky. We live in the Hammock. In 1998, we were buyer number 3 on the ocean. They ran a bulldozer where Ocean Ridge is, so we could see the property stakes. We had looked at both coasts of Florida, and we loved Palm Coast, we loved A1A, and we loved the Hammock. And we've bought 3 properties here, and we now live in one of them on Cypress Wood. One thing I didn't hear from staff or from any of your questions was the term scenic A1A. And I'd like to point that out to you, that whatever your developer and owner wants to do, it has to comply with that. Now, I think the planning board has done a really good job on a number of different things and a crappy job on some others. The best one recently that you've done is the Bronx Pizza House. It's well done. It blends with the road and everything. You didn't do enough parking, and there will be a fatality one of these days from the parking lot problem. I was ready to lambaste the use of a car wash, but the owner said, "Oh, we're not going to do a car wash, but I want you to give me an exception and lift the tent so I can get my nose under it, and when I figure it out, I'll tell you what that is." I'm not sure that's a good use of the staff or your board in letting that happen. Deny their motion, send them back. If the owner can't figure out something that works with scenic A1A, Michael, you ought to tell those guys to sell the property and let somebody who can figure something out that'll blend with the community. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, please state your name and where you live.
My name is Dr. Lynn Bravo Rosewater. I live in the Hammock. I have a question for the board that says, how does someone go to the TRC with no plans, no indication what they want to build, and then be able to come to the planning board, which is the step after? As I view it, you go to the TRC, you come to the planning board, you go to the commissioners. So I don't know how this got here tonight, because it seems to me that the obligation, if you come to the TRC, is to say, here's what we want to do, here's what our plans look like. TRC says, oh, we think that's a good idea. They come to you, and then it finally goes to the commissioners. So I just feel like the process seems backwards to me, because I don't know how you give someone permission for something without knowing what they want. And it seems that one of the things they said was that they want to have the ability to build whatever they want. And there's things that are prohibited by the scenic overlay, which is part of the land development code. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. State your name and where you're from.
Good evening. My name is Eric Drost. I live at 70 Sanchez Avenue, which is effectively right across the street from this property. One of the things that I didn't hear tonight is the impact on the neighborhood. It's, like I said, right across the street from my house. And putting a high-intensity, heavy-use commercial facility in there would have tremendous impact. Bronx House, the parking, the traffic from that probably has increased tremendously and created, like the gentleman before, created issues coming in and out of the neighborhood. Now you're going to block out, that's on 17th Road. Now you'll have 18th Road jammed up as well. Doesn't seem to be very logical to me. It could be there seems to be better uses of that land than jamming up the neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Ennis, we'll have to see if we can. Carlos, can you set up the overhead?
Get to that. Just didn't want to start my 3 minute. Oh, here it is. All right. We'll get to that.
Just make sure you state your name for the record.
Yes, my name is Dennis Clark. I live in the Hammock. I live actually on A1A, the Scenic Byway. I am also chair of the Scenic A1A Pride Committee. So I'll be happy to answer any questions about the Scenic A1A Pride review in your package, outside of my 3 minutes, that is.
I was going to ask you that. Are you going to talk for the group again, or just for the 3 minutes that you were going to get?
I'm going to talk about other things in case, but if you have questions, I'd be glad to answer them outside of my 3
Understand that, but I
minutes.
just want to make sure you're speaking for the 3 minutes, not 10 minutes for the.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
This question came up before. How many RCs or C2s are there versus RCs and residential? If you look at this, this is within a 1,000-foot radius. You have 22 RCs, you have 51 R1s, which is rural residential, and 1 C2, which is JT's, which really doesn't have to be C2 unless they seat more than 150 people. I wanted to address both the proposed land use change and the zoning change because the zoning change is dependent on the land use change. I looked at the justifications in the package, and I have rebuttals for every one of them. I'll just hit a couple. The future land use element policy A2.3.3 is a justification. It's part of the comp plan. Examine mixed use, low intensity, and RC zoning to encourage commercial clusters at roadway intersections and eliminate ineffective strip development. Now, the rebuttal is the above policy is also part of Objective A2.3. The heading is the objective. Flagler County shall continue to work with corridor management entities for the A1A River and Sea Trail Scenic Highway and the A1A Ocean Shore to ensure consistency with the adopted corridor management plan. And it includes the following policy, A2.3.1, Flagler County shall develop design standards in the land development regulations to encourage village centers as methods of discouraging strip commercial development. And if you look at the definition of village centers, what they are is they're meant to be walkable centers with multiple businesses, shared parking, and entrances that keep the traffic off of A1A, not to add the traffic to A1A. Just to give a little more on I'll do the zoning another time. I think we already covered some of these other things. A comparison between RC special exceptions and C2 permitted uses shows that there are only a few differences, and they are uses that are not all consistent with the scenic byway and the surrounding residential area. And as for nobody wanting to buy residential on a busy highway, well, I am one of those people who likes living on a national scenic byway. like close to the beaches, parks, bike trails, and everything else that's available. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Dennis. Do we have anyone else that would like to comment?
Hi, my name's Laura Stillman. I live at 51 Flagler Drive in the Hammock. It was very interesting when the representative for the owner says to us this evening, and I don't recall seeing this in the packet, so I apologize if it was in there, that it's not going to be a car wash. So like others, I had my comments geared toward why are we going to put in a car wash? But just some background, my husband and I chose in 2019 to retire. We're in Ohio. We're looking, where do we want to live in Florida? We had never been to Palm Coast in our life. He found it on the internet and it checkmarked everything we were looking for. We get down here for a week and to check this place out. We'd never been here, but he's talking about we're going to move here. We pull onto the A1A out in the Hammock, and I went, oh my goodness, this is where I want to move. Literally, we'd been off the airplane for like 2 hours, drive directly to the Hammock from Orlando, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Overarching live oaks, palm trees, green grass, and where there were residences and where there were businesses, there's these beautiful buffers. I was like, where's the grocery store? I was so glad to see there was one here. But you don't even know it's there. You have to kind of, somebody tell you. Why would we want to take away from that beauty? Because Florida and Palm Coast and Flagler County is about tourism. That's our economic driver. Why are you going to risk that economic driver by putting up something that's high intensity commercial? Because once that goes in, even if they say they're not going to do a car wash, whatever goes in there, if it doesn't work, then they get to sell that property with that zoning still attached to it, is my understanding. What are we going to do then? We're stuck. They're going to have to come back to the board, but they don't know, they no longer will have to change the zoning. So I'm really scared about not looking to the future. In my previous life, I spent 12 years on a city commission. One of the things I always kept in mind on everything we decided on, especially changes to existing code, not 5 years in advance, not 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now. This town and the Hammock's still going to be there. What are you going to have in that space 50 years from now? Because you can't change it. So I'm asking you, please be very, very careful with this. I don't personally see a need to go to high intensity. I think it's exactly what it needs to be. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else? Again, your name and where you live.
Laura Cohill, Flagler Drive, part of Marine Land Acres. And I'm going to make this really brief because we don't want this to go on any longer than need be. But I think what everybody's scared of is the precedence that this is going to set. You change one zoning law like that, and we're going to end up with a Taco Bell on the corner across the street.
Thank you. Come right up, sir. Your name and where you live?
My name is Tom Gallagher, 34 Cherokee at the Hammock. I just wanted to reiterate some of the things the applicant has not even said what they actually want to do with it. How can you vote to change something when you don't know what's actually going to be there? Reiterating some of those things. Denial would be the best route at this time and probably in the future as well. I'd say please vote no on this. And the two high density that they mentioned was the Publix and the hotel. And the hotel is a comfortable place for people to visit. And the Publix is the one thing that allows people to shop there. But other than that, I think we're good the way we are. And keep it the way it is. Please vote no against this.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, sir. Name and where you live at?
My name is William White, 70 Ocean Oaks Lane. My property backs up to the Malacopra Preserve, and we had a little trouble a couple years ago. Hurricane Matthew came through. destroyed, I would say, almost all of the oak trees in the Malacopter, gone. So we've gone from a forest to a savanna. And I would encourage the board to go and take a look at what's going on down there. Because if you want to maintain a hammock, and that should be the number one definition, we're throwing the word hammock around, but a hammock has a specific definition. High density of trees, higher elevation, a micro climate. It protects the property behind it. You're going to lose that property. You're going to lose the ability of the hammock to protect property. And that includes Palm Coast, because if a hurricane comes, it goes over the island, Palm Coast is toast. So I hope you guys understand what a hammock is, and I would encourage the board to go back and look up the definition of a hammock. Because if you're changing it tonight, it's not a name, it has a specific definition. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else?
It's Bailey. I live in the hammock directly behind the affected zone change. My neighbor and I got hundreds of signatures for our petition against the zone change by the locals in our neighborhood and many people who love the hammock the way it is. One of my main takeaways from all the people we talked to is anything that can be categorized as commercial high intensity does not fit in the hammock. Many of us residents do not mind if something commercial comes to the hammock, just as long as it fits with the vibe. A car wash or anything high intensity does not fit. I rent out a room in my house on Airbnb, and I took a look back on the reviews from just this past year of our what our revenue generating guests have said about our lovely hammock area. So I'm going to start with September. John of September said, "My second time here, such a quiet and serene area." Robert in August said, "Absolutely cannot beat the location, I will be back." Debbie in August said, "Such a beautiful neighborhood in the hammock. I was there during the extreme heat of the Florida summer, but the shade of the trees made a difference. Thinking about coming back to the hammock." Lucia in August said, "Lovely and secluded, little human traffic, very undeveloped, which was wonderful." Erica in June said, "The neighborhood was absolutely gorgeous. I wish we were there longer." James in June said, "Bailey's place off of A1A was unique and peaceful." Darrell in May said, "Amazing location." Christy in May said, "The cozy hammock is nestled in a quiet, quaint neighborhood that still resembles an old Florida neighborhood. The preserve of the area was well worth the visit." Denise in May, "The hammock was a wonderful place to stay, quiet and relaxing. Highly recommend staying here." Tina in April, "I enjoyed waking up to the birds singing. I highly recommend Bailey's place." Kaya in April, "Sweet little bungalow type, stay amidst old beautiful trees on a dirt road." Alyssa in February said, "It was our first time to Palm Coast. Bailey's place is in a safe, quiet location. We will be back." Sadie in February said, "We loved our stay so much. We booked it again the next time we are in town. You cannot beat the location." So as you can see, the hammock is treasured immensely by the residents, the community, and tourists alike. If we ruin it for some out-of-state investors who know nothing about the area, what will our detriment be next to this treasured plot of our county? Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Do we have any further comments from anyone? Okay, so seeing none, we will close public comments and return this to the board. Does
Chairman,
any of the board members?
I think we need to give the counsel for the applicant rebuttal time.
Yes. Applicant, would you like to come up and rebuttal?
So we heard a lot of things about traffic. There's going to be more traffic, there's going to be more people. But what we have to keep in mind is we were looking at theoretical maximums. One of the comments that were made was, and I think if I wrote it down correctly, it was 400 parking spaces. Well, it's only an acre. We can't physically put 400 parking spaces that would be required with that type of use, that intense of a use. So based on the physical size of the property, there's going to be natural development restrictions. So the 16,000+ trips that county staff put together, that's a theoretical maximum. That is absolute worst case scenario if that property was able to sustain it from a site development perspective. We also heard about buffers. Well, we're still going to be required to comply with all the implemented scenic overlay requirements and the base requirements of our land development code. So the buffers are going to be required to be there. That's what county staff is here to do when it comes back for a site plan. There were comments about what if the applicant sells the property? That's very possible. Not saying he's going to. His intent is to retire here and become part of our community. He's created jobs in other locations. He's looking to do it here in our community, and he's identified an area based on the scenic A1A overlay that has designated this area for commercial uses. He's doing what he can to help become a part of the community that he and his wife want to reside in. So I would encourage you all to look at this. And while we have to take into account the theoretical maximums that has been supplied by county planning staff, the physical size of the property just simply aren't going to allow it. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Does any board member has any question for staff or applicant? Excuse me, sir. Public comment is closed.
I'm the owner of the property.
You're the owner? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay.
Please state your name.
Scott Hutchison, and I'm a resident of the hammock also.
Can you repeat your name again?
Scott Hutchison.
Okay, thanks.
You know, it's the same way that this lady over here was saying that, you know, when she came here to visit, she fell in love with this place, and so did we, my wife and I. You know, we have 4 kids, adult kids, and 6 grandkids. But we fell in love with the hammock, and we want to bring our family here to visit us as much as they can throughout the year. But, you know, I've invested in the county. I've going to build a house here, and I'm bought some additional land, residential land, to eventually build and make this place better. So I'm all about making this town even better. I want to do, the reason I bought these lots is because I've been a businessman my whole life, and chose to retire here, but I don't golf, and I don't hunt, and I don't fish. I like to do business, and I like to work, and I want to do something great for the hammock with these lots. I don't know exactly what yet, but I've got some ideas, and I want to give it the service that the hammock needs, something that they can use daily. And so I'm not here to cause, you know, I am a resident of Florida. I'm a resident of Flagler County, and I'm going to be here, and I'm going to live here, and this is where I'm going to be. But I want to do something great for this area. And I've been in other locations where I've done that and been successful, and I want to make this area even better than it is.
Thank you, Mr. Hutchinson. Does any board member have a question for staff, the owner, the applicant? Sir?
Yeah, I've got questions for staff.
Right, go right on ahead. Sir. You can stay.
Adam, you warned us in the beginning that we weren't to look at uses in a decision-making on this particular line item, but there are some references to uses in the staff reports, in the technical review committee reports specifically. So I just want to be clear. I don't want to go too far with this, but I want to be clear that is it my understanding correct in that there is insufficient infrastructure in this particular area to support industrial wastewater disposal? Did I read the health department's conclusions correctly?
Correct, and I think he made comments about that at the TRC level, and that at present, without central sanitary sewer collection, it would make industrial wastewater collection disposal problematic. Having that on a septic tank, on-site sewage disposal system is difficult. to say the least.
Well, if I read the health department's comments correctly, it's impossible without
I would not
sewage
say
disposal.
impossible because we have them operating in the county. So I don't think that's fair to say because we do have them.
Okay.
But I think he's saying-
In the comments that we received from Mr. Cemento in his letter of June 21st, he doesn't dispute that there'll be a car wash. He says we'll comply with whatever the regulations are relative to that wastewater disposal issue. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Other than tonight, have we heard that they're not thinking about doing a car wash?
Other than tonight, that's been the first mention of that.
Okay. 17,000 trips is what you've come up with in your analysis, but no study has been done. Is that correct?
Correct.
I'd like to ask Mr. Moylan, are we to rely on the analysis from staff regarding the traffic because there's no study? Is that something that we can?
Yes, sir. That is the evidence in the record. Sorry? Yeah.
And
that
there's
is the
nothing in the
evidence
record to dispute that?
Correct.
So I have to assume that this change of land use is going to generate per acre 17,000 trips on A1A per day?
Potentially.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Thank you. Does any other board member have any questions for?
It's a little more than an acre. Mr. Connor, it is slightly over 1 acre, but generally what you're saying is correct, yes.
Do any other board members have a
I
question?
have a question,
Go ahead,
Adam.
Brenda.
So on a lot of the things that we've talked about, traffic is one of the things, study and what they plan on doing with that. So just to understand better as well, because I'm new, why, it does seem like we're doing this backwards. Why are we granting permission for something that they don't even know what they want to do, especially without the studies that we require from every other applicant?
On the land use side, what the applicant has stated is, I believe I'm summarizing this correctly, is that they feel that their ultimate use would generate less than the 500 trips, which would then put the burden on completing the traffic study on staff. That's how it's listed in our land development code. But at the same time, though, with that, the obligation that we have as part of the land use is to give you the worst case. And so that's why I've got to use the 17,000 trips as part of this. Now, the applicant could, or the applicant's representative, the owner's representative could stand up and say, no, here's what we want to do. Here's our intended use. Effectively, that kind of framework would become what I would refer to the future parcel-specific limiting policy. I hate doing those. We've had a good, strong tradition of doing those here in Flagler County, but those effectively would identify in some way the use through the comp plan, through a limiting policy that would say, here's the specificity that you're wanting, that you're requiring as part of your recommendation as part of the board action that would follow specific to the land use. However, none of that is needed at this point. And so I think where Mr. Connor was heading with this is that, your responsibility and your recommendation, again, I heard some folks talk about it saying, please deny this, please don't approve it. You don't do that anyway. You're recommending denial or approval to the Board of County Commissioners. So again, remember the first thing I said was you're a recommending body to the board. You don't have the authority to approve it or to deny it. But certainly weighing in on that is what we presented as the worst case analysis. Knowing also, and I do need to make sure I say this on the record, we have already designated as a Board of County Commissioners back in 1995 that A1A would be a constrained roadway. Now, that doesn't excuse adding 17,000 trips to it, but we've already said that as a board, as a governing body, the board came back and told DOT at that time through resolution that they were acknowledging that A1A would degrade in its level of service standard. What that means basically is that there will be a continuance of traffic that'll be added to that 2-lane roadway, and there is no expectation on anyone's part, either the applicant or any of the owners, anyone else here, that we're ever going to widen that, because we want that. In fact, we've made a policy decision that at some point traffic will become such that that there's that potential for that to happen, where you will have effectively so much traffic volume that you will have a reduction in the level of service that will degrade the roadway to potentially to a point of failure. and that the county commission has told DOT unequivocally that that is okay with us. But to touch on that, again, your analysis, what I've submitted for the record, absent anything to the contrary, is your competent substantial evidence for you to base your decision on your recommendation for this specific request. I think Mr. Moylan may want to add to that.
I would like to follow up, based on your question and some of the comments we've heard from the public. You can't hold it against the applicant that they're not coming forward with a specific type of project, like I'm going to build a car wash, or my intention is to build X. We're setting a broad policy when we look at future land use, and it's open to many different, it's open to several different zoning options, and within each zoning option, there's a whole number of uses that are potentially available. Just as they are in any land use in the county, in any zoning district in the county. If someone comes in to rezone something residential, we don't necessarily need to know if they want to build a 1- or 2-story house for zoning purposes. That would come in for permitting, and there's other ways to review that. When a future land use, you're looking at a very broad policy making of potential uses. And so here they're asking for commercial. You don't know what. You just know it's going to be some kind of business, and that's okay. Just on that point, I wanted to be clear.
Thank you, Sean. Does anybody have any more questions?
Chairman?
I want to make just clarification to staff. So on our recommendation, does this open up Pandora's box for the rest of the RC property owners to come to us and say, well, we want C2, we want C2, we want C2, and then we have a line of C2 zone properties just because we recommended that this particular property can be C2. Does that happen?
It's a tough question to answer. I suppose I would say possibly. Obviously, each application stands on its own merits and would have to present its own evidence. But there's certainly the argument of, well, why not me if you approved him when I'm just 400 yards away, for example. I would expect to hear that if you had someone else looking to rezone. Again, though, each application would stand on its own merits and its own evidence. About the best I could respond.
Chairman? Mr. Sullivan, can I ask you a question? It's a
Yes, sir.
technical
Thank you so
question.
much.
Are these lots unified title, these two lots?
I do not believe so, no.
They're not?
Correct.
Okay. So I'm looking at this thing for a lot of different things. First of all, the setbacks are going to stay the same, Adam. Prohibited uses under the scenic byway regulations, someone brought that up, would be the same because that overlay does not go away. So we're not really worried about the byway regulations changing. Whatever the requirements are for them will still be the same, whether it's this future land use map changes or not. It'd be the same regulations that we have to apply to. Am I correct?
I'd be hesitant to say, I think they're similar, but there are, under the RC, with a special exception, there are a limited number of uses that can be requested for the special exception. And they're of a nature that's typically, I think you define it broad terms as a neighborhood commercial, whereas the C2 by its definition is general commercial, has a broader set of permitted uses. Both of those, though, having specific prohibited uses that are listed. A little odd in RC because if it's not listed as a special exception, it's prohibited because you can't do it because it's not a listed special exception. But RC has that, and then, best I remember, and then C2 has that as well. So they're a little different.
That was where I was going with the question about that. I didn't get to that part of it, but specifically when you get into the zoning issue, if this passes, it goes to zoning, what are the big differences are? I mean, we already know that obviously people are worried about a car wash. And by the way, it was evident to me, just looking at it, that this lot in its current infrastructure and size would not be a car wash. But what prohibited uses or what uses would be allowed under the C2 that the RC would prohibit it or would not be allowed that would protect what the people are worried about as far as, this intent, some people call it industrial use, it isn't industrial.
No.
So what would, in practicality, being a, 1 acre lot, we're not gonna see a supermarket on it because it's just not big enough, but what is the practical changes in or use differences, and, you can obviously chime in too if you have a feeling about it, but what are those differences that would be allowed, that wouldn't be allowed if it was residential versus the C2?
No, and I'm stepping a little bit into the next application, a little hesitant to
I
do
know.
that now.
Well, the reason why I'm bringing that, because they do have something
Yes.
to do with each other.
They
This-
do.
This Pandora box has already been opened, both in
Yes.
staff report and public comments. I mean, Mr. Clark actually said most of the uses are the same except for a few. And quite honestly, I got this packet, as you know. I just came back from a trip, and I got this packet yesterday and read it, and I did not have a chance to go through all the different zoning classifications and try to make an analysis. But could you give me a quick Reader's Digest version of what are the big, heavy things that may be something that would affect the people in the hammock that is allowed under C2, that is not allowed under the...
I think the obvious nuance that's here is that the distinction is that the C2 has a list of by right uses, and then the RC would have the special exception. And so with the special exception, you'd have a set of controls. You'd have a set of specific application that would come in, and you would evaluate the application. Admittedly, the 9 things that are listed under special exception are all site plan related.
Right.
So it's
But I mean, is
signage,
there
location,
anything-
refuse.
Is there any use in the C2 that would not be necessarily allowed in RC, on
Yes,
face value?
there are.
So give me an idea of what those are.
So the convenience market being the first one, the one that has basically convenience store gas dispensing, not a special exception use within the RC zoning district. I think there's bowling alleys that are listed, commercial recreation generally, but that's something that's not called out in RC as a special exception. Restaurants admittedly are in both. I think you heard Mr. Clark mention that maybe the seats are a distinction. I don't know if that's a distinction that's there or not. I think you're limited in all those in parking and how you can make everything fit. And that's going to be kind of across the board for any of these. I could come up with the most noxious C2 use, and there's probably 2 things that are in play there. One, I have the limited size of the property, and 2, I'm not going to put a super Walmart in the hammock. It's not going to work. And even Publix and that came up as the example. I wasn't here for that, but if you look at Publix that's in the hammock, it doesn't match the Publix that's off of Belterre. There's some realism that needs to be put into these analyses that comes back and says, it just doesn't make sense that you're going to have something of such a noxious use that it's going to end up, or size that's going to make it where it's going to locate in the hammock, because it's just simply not going to be able to make a return on its investment. And that's the reality of it. And so I think there's got to be some feeling of a realism here with these. Bless you. But there are admittedly C2 uses that are pretty intense. When we look at things that are prohibited in A1A, we don't have the car dealerships, for example. So if I looked and I said anywhere else in the county, I'd have anything with outside display, boat repair, boat sales and service. I don't have that in the hammock.
Whether it's C2 or whether it's RC?
Where RC, I don't have that at all. C2, I would have that ability to have a car dealership, but it's prohibited in the scenic A1A.
Right.
So I think you've got to take those listings of those uses. That's why I kind of foreshadowed a little bit of that, try to give it all to you so that you can look at those. But the distinction, the most obvious one, is by approving a commercial high intensity with a C2, you lose some of that control, because you will not see this again.
Well, except for the control, as you said, had more to do with technical site plan.
True.
I mean, we've faced this before where somebody comes in and they meet the requirements of a site plan, and we say, well, we just don't like your kind of business, so you can't have it here. That becomes problematic anyway. And that's maybe in this decision, because this is, as you said, you can make that decision at this point and say, well, we don't like that. And so we're not going to allow you to do it. But then under the RC, if it ever comes back under RC, they could still do it and do a lot of the things anyway. I don't know, Sullivan, if you wanted to add anything to that particular comment. I'm trying to determine about the differences between what you're asking for and what it is now.
No, and I'll defer to Mr. Mingle. He knows far more
Okay.
about our land development code than I do.
And again, I'm saying some of this stuff out loud for, I mean, not necessarily for my board members, but so, in some degree, yes, but also for the public. But in either case, whoever gets a permit on these lot, for whatever, whether it stays the same or changes, trees will be cut. You know, it's just gonna happen. So the idea that if you don't change it, the trees will all stay there the same, that's not gonna happen. And I just wanna make that clear that if something is approved, doesn't mean that you save the trees or you don't save the trees. If the setbacks are the same, actually, the 20,000 square feet versus 25,000 square feet, again, maybe an extreme example, but that's less of an impact on that. But I'm a little bit concerned just about the uses in the second item. That's why I was concerned. So I look at both of these two, this one and the one you have future, as two different pieces completely. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Langelo. Does anybody have any more questions for
I just
them?
have a question for Adam, and I know you're not putting up a car wash. I know that's only a little over an acre. But would a car wash even be allowed in the scenic A1A overlay anyway?
Quick answer, yes. It's not listed as a prohibited use, and it is a permitted use within the C2 district. So, yes.
Okay. I realize it's not what the intent is for that small property. Just thought I'd ask.
That's it. Any more questions? Oh,
Can I clarify a point, please?
come right up. Thank you, sir.
We kind of got into the use issue in response to Mr. Langelo. One of the things that would be allowed if it goes to C2 is the same issue we dealt with Hammock Harbor, because C2 opens it up to other commercial uses of a nature similar to those listed may be permitted upon determination by the planning board that such uses are appropriate in the C2 district. The standard industrial classification manual will be used as a reference for these determinations. So we get back to the whole Hammock Harbor issue where we don't know what can come in. Somebody can say it's similar to what's allowed in the C2 use in other parts of the county. So that kind of opens it up for a lot of different things. And just one other point, I'll sit down, but the comments that were made, we can't use it as a car wash because we don't have septic, or because we have to put it in septic. When central sewer comes away, the septic doesn't become an issue, and it could be turned into a car wash. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we've heard from staff, we've heard from the applicants, we've heard from the owner, and we heard from the public. Are we ready to make a motion? Does this board have a motion for me? Sorry I'm putting you guys in a spot, but we got to move on.
I see Anthony reaching for his mic there.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion. Make a motion, we deny application 3348. I think the applicant would be better served to come back with what they intend to put on the property. That way we're not using the worst case scenario for parking, traffic, and the other things we talked about. I think the applicant would be better served if we knew what we were dealing with. It's just a comment, but that, I stand by that motion.
I second.
I'll second.
All right, thanks. So we have a motion to deny it, and we have a second. Do we want another shot at discussing the motion?
I just wanted to say that I think, I don't have a problem with the motion at all. I just think that, like I said, I look at both these two separately, and I'm looking at the surrounding area of what's right there, and it may be a little bit drastic. Then again, I'm not sure, though, that when the RC is applied and somebody comes in with an application, that our motion tonight and whatever the county board decides to do will necessarily make everybody happy in the long run anyway.
Right.
So.
I agree with that, but the issue that's before the board right now is whether we want to change the future land use classification from low intensity, low medium density to commercial high intensity. That's just inappropriate in the Hammock. I'm not trying to deny this applicant use of his property. I want him to get his full best use out of it. If he wants to put a commercial structure or that's compatible with the Hammock there, but I think we need to make it clear that I, for one, and I think this board, is not in favor of high-intensity commercial uses in the hamlet. It's just inappropriate for the area. So I vote in favor of the motion.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. We have discussed it. Is there last-minute discussions? All right, so all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. And the motion is, and all those opposed say nay. Okay, so the motion is denied for application number 3348. I know that you guys are kind of happy, but please, let's stick to the rules. No clapping and jumping for joy, at least not here. All right, so next item is item number 4. It's a quasi-judicial requiring a disclosure of ex parte communications, application number 3349. Does
Mr.
anybody-
Chairman, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? I don't think it wasn't on the agenda. It must have been an oversight.
Yeah,
And just for housekeeping, we do still have to do the minutes of the meetings.
Well, it wasn't on the
Or
agenda.
we're not doing it because we got them in
Yeah,
our packet.
I left it off the agenda, and it was an error on my part, and so I figured we'll just bring it back to you next time. Since it was not on the agenda, I didn't want to have you try to take action on it.
So you do
we'll-
not want
we'll
us to
bring
take
it.
it-
We'll
is
bring
that-
it back next meeting.
Mr. Langelo, I
Okay.
had already discussed it with him.
Have to reread it again next time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, 2 sets, not just this one, but
I'll
the
let
next
you
one.
read it, okay? Next time. All right, so the next item is a quasi-judicial requiring the ex parte communication, application number 3349. Does anybody have any disclosures? No? Okay. So this is a rezoning from RC Residential Limited Commercial District to C2 General Commercial and Shopping Center. Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the companion application for the land use that we just reviewed. So I'll go through these even more quicker because all of these background slides all still the same, stay the same. And so the rezoning is from that RC to C2. It is dependent on the future land use map amendment, so that if you imagine these two are codependent effectively, that 3349, 3348, if 3348 is not ultimately approved by the Board of County Commissioners in 3349, the rezoning can never go into effect because the rezoning then to C2 would be inconsistent with the mixed-use, low future land use. Remember, we have a table in our comprehensive plan that identifies consistency between land use and zoning. That's what's kind of got all this moving as it is. So your recommendation on the prior one, while you've made a recommendation for denial, we still have to go through the rezoning step. You can, in effect, still make any one of these decisions on the rezoning. You're not, my opinion, you're not compelled to recommend denial on this just because you recommended denial on the future land use. They are two separate applications. This one being quasi-judicial. We did list within your packet some criteria that we've used in the past for you in evaluating rezoning requests. This rezoning, though, for the record, and to belabor the point about the interrelationship between 3348, the flume, 3349, one of the determinations you have to make for the rezoning, the Board of County Commissioners will have to make, is that the zoning would have to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And so if then, again, 3348 is not approved ultimately, then 3349 could not occur. With that as the preamble, recommendation potentially for approval being made to the Board of County Commissioners of the rezoning from RC to C2. I've listed a couple of subject to items there, which to me kind of touch on conditional zoning. We really don't have that going on here, but clearly the land use is the contingency here. If the land use doesn't happen, then the zoning never happens. You could recommend denial of application 3349, or you could continue this to a future meeting for either staff or the applicant to come back with additional information for you that would help you with the decision on the rezoning application. With that, I'll close, Mr. Chairman. Await any questions or comments from you, and then also then look to the applicant, I guess, as the next presenter. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Adam. Do any of the planning board members have any questions or comments for staff at this point? Okay, seeing none, would the applicant or owner like to make a presentation at this time?
Just to reiterate essentially what we spoke about earlier, we were fairly comprehensive on both the future land use and the commercials, or excuse me, the zoning designation for this property. Again, we're still going to be subject to scenic A1A overlays and all the other land development code requirements. So we would request that you recommend approval.
Thank you. Bring it back to the board for any questions or any comments to the applicant or owner. None? We'll open it up to public comment. Is there anybody wanting to come up and comment on this?
Dennis Bear on behalf of Hammock Civic Association. I waited this time until I was called, but just a couple of issues. First, on the typical rezoning application process in the county, there's a number of documents and a number of reports and things that you're supposed to submit. Just like we heard on the future land use map amendment, they didn't submit a traffic analysis. As part of your rezoning requirements, you're supposed to submit site plans of what the intended use is for the property. That is not included in this package. I understand it may not be required by the Land Development Code, but for some reason, every rezoning I've ever been involved with in the county, typically there's a site plan involved, so you at least have an idea of what the proposed use is. And you know, with all due respect to the owners, I hope they become longtime residents of the community and make things better, but it's just kind of curious that they want to rezone so they don't have to go through a special exception, so they don't have to submit plans for you all as the planning board to review. They don't want to submit plans as part of their rezoning so nobody can know what the plans are for the property. But then at some point down the road, they'll go to TRC, here's our traffic analysis, here's our intended use, but you all never get to see the project again. So my recommendation is you just recommend denial until we have a better feel for what's going to be done in this particular location. In following up on the last comments, there are a number of commercial uses, C2 uses, that are prohibited in the A1A scenic corridor. However, there are a number of them that are not prohibited, like we talked about, that kind of vague category of other commercial uses, which has been a nightmare up in the Hammock Harbor going back and forth. Is this similar to another C2 use or is it not? Is it permitted? So that's one big issue, that you have that kind of that open quagmire of what could be done on a particular piece of property that may not be in existence right now in the Hammock area. You know, with the RC, there's numerous existing uses, smaller restaurants, office spaces, things that we see up and down the corridor that serve the community, lower impact, less traffic, and that's why you should deny this particular rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Do we have anybody else? Come up, ma'am. Please share your name and where you live.
Laura Stillman, 51 Flagler Drive in the Hammock. And I want to point out a couple of things. I heard a lot of maybes, could be, possibly, probably. I didn't hear definitelys, and that scares me. That leaves the door open to so many other things to happen. And I even heard the representative for the owner was asked a question. He said, I think. Oh, you know, he should know. He should be able to answer the questions. So just beware. Human nature is to hear a sentence and kind of drop those maybes out, and what you think you're hearing is definite. You heard a lot of maybes tonight, so please be aware of that. And also, I do welcome Mr. Hutchinson, the owner, into the neighborhood. Again, I've only lived here now for 2 years. It's fantastic. And there are so many other things to do besides being a business owner. Come play pickleball. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, once again.
Hello, Pam Hathaway. I live in the Hammock on Hernandez Avenue. Promise not to sing any more songs. First of all, I do want to welcome Scott, and I guess his wife is maybe next to him, to the Hammock. And I believe, Scott, that you will have many opportunities to develop that property under the RC rules. I don't think we need to a change to the C2 zoning at all, because that's not inconsistent with the rest of the Hammock. the zoning of C2 is open to so many other options. I think that Mr. Hutchinson will have plenty of opportunity to develop the property under the RC rules. It does open a Pandora's box. I think maybe one of our planning board members, Mr. Lombardo, mentioned that it can open the door to other people saying, well, wait a minute, he got C2, why can't I get C2? And make that scenic highway something that we do not want in the hammock. I don't think anybody in Flagler County wants that for the hammock. Thank you guys for all you do.
Thank you.
Hi, Dennis Clark, again, live on A1A. You asked the question, what's the difference between RC versus C2 zoning? I had already made a table showing the differences in what's allowed and what's not, what's prohibited and what's allowed in the scenic corridor. So I'll just hand these out if you'd like them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just to note, the ones under C2 that are crossed out are not permitted in the scenic corridor. So you'll see that, for instance, bars and nightclubs are allowed in C2, as well as bowling alleys, daycare centers, employment agencies, but also automobile rental agencies, private clubs, car washes, hotels, motels, and other tourist accommodations. So if we need another hotel, we'll have to do C2. But other than that, I mean, there are things that, there's only a few things that are really prohibited in C2. So it does open it up for things that we really don't want on the scenic corridor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Do we have any further comments? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. Do we have a rebuttal? No rebuttal? Board, do we have any comments or questions for staff? All right, so we've heard from, again, the staff, applicant, owner, and our public. Are we ready to make a motion?
Mr. Chair, while we await a motion, I do want to comment on some of the comments that you heard. And I think based on the prior application, we have kind of have a predetermined outcome here, because you have to make sure this is consistent with the comp plan. Right. Aside from that, I do want to be clear for your understanding, not just for this item, but in your role on this board, when you're faced with rezonings, the applicant absolutely does not have to come forward with a specific plan about what they intend to do. There's no site plan unless we're dealing with a planned unit development. That's a different animal. But the whole point of a rezoning is that the property owner is able to avail him or herself of all the permitted uses within that zoning district. Of course, they got to adhere to the zoning district in terms of impervious coverage and setbacks and all of the rest, but they do not have to provide you a specific plan.
Thank you for that clarification. If there's any comments or any other discussion, this is the time. Nothing?
Motion to deny.
Motion, we have a motion to deny.
And not because we don't know what it is, but purely because of flow, and I just don't think that it's the right space for a high intensity.
Ms. Hayward has a motion on the table to deny.
I'll second the motion for denial.
We have a motion to deny, and we have a second motion by Mr. Lombardo. All those in, do we have further discussion on that? Any further discussion on that? No? That motion? All right, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Application 3349 is denied. Item number 5 is the legislative not requiring disclosure of ex parte communication, and that's application number 3350, small-scale future land use map from amendment from mixed use, low intensity, low medium to density to commercial high intensity. Can you please present, staff?
Yes, sir. And so this is the one that we have that's just under half an acre. It's 4 lots of record. You can see its proximity to 17th Road. These graphics here on the next, we'll show you a little closer what we've got going on. We do have that Citgo gas station, I think it is, to the south. Future land use is mixed use, mixed use low again for the entirety of this area. Then we do have on the corner, we do have existing C2 zoning. So we have that in place. And this is adjacent to that. On the flood side, not unlike the other application, we have the shaded X and X, so no special flood hazard area. And then the soils being between the Bimini sand and then also then the Cocoa Bulow complex. And no wetlands. With this one, we have the 50% limiting development area limiting factor for the mixed-use low because the parcel size leaves it at 10,000 square feet. But with the commercial high-intensity scenario, it would decrease it a further 2,000 square feet down to 8,000 square feet because of the 0.4 floor area ratio that's there. So that's going to change a bit of the analysis. And on the side of looking at residential build-out potential, we're actually lifted a bit because of these being 4 independent lots of record. So ordinarily the 0.46 acres would end up pushing us towards about a 3-unit count. Instead, we're at 4 units because each of those lots could develop independently with a single-family dwelling. Our land development code allows that to happen. So our analysis here will be based on those 4 units, that maximum potential build-out with the existing land use. And so the population impact, 10 fewer persons because we're removing the residential component. Trips, again, the scenario, the worst case using the convenience market, 6,764.8 trips generated, increase of 6,727.08. Again, how realistic that is, can't really tell you because every other convenience store that we've looked at, 6,000 square feet, and those are the ones that are along primary road frontage. The ones that were most recently built along 100 are at 6,000 or right around that. So anticipating that this is a high estimate of transportation trip impacts, but that's all we have to work with. Potable water, again, using the 8,000 square foot convenience market example would be an increase of 223.6 gallons per day over the 4 residential units. And then increase of 78.88 gallons sanitary sewer over that 4 residential unit scenario. Solid waste, 10.2 pounds additionally. Again, fairly marginal on those increases here because we are talking about fairly small parcel size at just less than a half acre. Parks and Recreation, again, the decrease in the 10 persons, and then your almost a full student reduction in educational demand based on that 0.239 student yield factor that the school board is now using. So again, just shy of a half acre, we've got that language that's there from the mixed use low intensity taken from the comprehensive plan. Again, no intended uses identified, so I had to use what I felt was the highest generator in using convenience market for that generator. We do have the proximity here that's a bit different than the previous one, where you have this basically dovetailed in between 2 existing commercial uses. One, not having that commercial high intensity, but arguably being a commercial high intensity use. It doesn't get much more high intensity than a convenience market with gas station, gas dispensing facilities. And then the Flume Amendment here, this application then determining the status, the future of the rezoning. And so 3351, the rezoning request is dependent on 3350. So we've mentioned some of those other considerations. I won't go into those with this, so just suffice to say that my comments I made specific on the record as far as the uses, the mix of uses, I think particularly to the land use side of the prior application. Let those stay on the record for this one. We have those three options again presented for you. The approval, recommendation for approval, application 3350. And that's from the mixed-use low to commercial high intensity. That's determination then will be that it's consistent with the Flagler County Comprehensive Plan. You can recommend denial. Basis for that would be that it is not consistent, or continue it to a time and date certain for the applicant or for staff to produce additional information based on the public comments or the board's questions. With that, wait, any questions or comments, submit my report for the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Adam. Once again, does the board have any questions for staff at this time? No? Would the applicant like to come up and present?
Good evening again. All right, so I think we all know the big difference on this application versus the prior application for the future land use amendment is the physical location of this property. So it's already sandwiched, for lack of a better phrase, in between two uses that correspond to the requested future land use element that we're here for today. We've also got a similar future land use element use right across the street, being Publix. So we believe the location of this property makes it prime for this future land use amendment, and well, you'll probably hear me on repeat again when we go to talk about the zoning change that we're requesting as well. We believe this parcel is very proper for this. We note that the theoretical maximums that staff has said that they have to assume associated with this application are much drastically less as opposed to the prior future land use application. So we would ask that this board recommend to county commissioners that this application is consistent with our future land use and comprehensive plan and recommend approval.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
May I ask Mr. Sullivan a question?
Sure, Mr. Langella.
I'm going to ask the same question I asked on the last one. Are these 4 lots of unified title at this time?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any more questions for the applicant? Thank you. Are we going to hear from back there? No? Right, so it's open to public comments, and you know the drill. 3 minutes, and you're out.
Put on the overhead again.
Carlos, can you switch to the overhead?
Dennis Clark, I live at the Hammock, NA1A. I wanted to show you this because you had asked about this earlier. How many RCs are there versus C2s in this area? This is pretty much the whole area showing where the Star Car Wash properties are and how many, the C2s are the red ones. So you see Publix. You also see the Hammock Wine and Cheese, which only is C2 because it was a car repair shop before it was a wine and cheese shop. It doesn't need to be C2. The Citgo station would need to be C2, so I'll give you that, and Publix. But then, and Palmco's Villas. But many of the other ones are just outdated. Bing's Landing, for instance, is zone C2, but doesn't need to be, nor do many of the other places. So that's just a snapshot of what it looks like, and you can see all the residential in that area as well. And within a 1,000-foot radius, again, 23 RCs, 61 rural residential units, 13 mobile homes, and 2 C2s. So the C2s are 2% of within a 1,000-foot radius of this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Do you have any further comments? Come right up.
Hi, my name is Leah Groom. I live in the Hammock. Like many of our neighbors, we moved to the area because of the nature, amazing trees, serenity, and simplicity of the neighborhood. We were aware that we were purchasing a house in an RC area. Not only am I a resident, I'm also a teacher at Flagler High School, a government teacher. So I'm hoping that I can take back a lesson in community involvement. I want to be able to explain that our system does work, policies and procedures that we have in place to encourage our students to become civic-minded. With that being said, I live directly behind the Bronx Pizza. When Bronx began to build, we were open-minded and hoped that a new business would be respectful of the neighborhood. The community expressed concerns about parking, among other issues, but we were not heard. Now it's a problem. Turning out of 17th is dangerous. The customers often park on the corner of A1A, blocking drivers' visions, which creates hazards for motorists, including myself, who ride a motorcycle. Parking is a joke there. I have a plethora of pictures showing cars in the middle of the 17th blocking the street. The garbage is blocking the street, including deliveries going up and down Sanchez before 7 a.m. I bring all this up just to demonstrate the fact that we brought this to your attention. We brought these concerns to you, and yet there it is. They're used with the special exception. So I just want you to consider, how would you like to stare out of your front window at that? Their property is, again, directly in front of us. I was kind of surprised that it went past the TRC committee meeting. I was there. There was no mention of what they wanted to do, so that was kind of surprising to me. I have collected with a neighbor close to 1,000 signed petitioners, so I would love to submit that so you guys can see the comments of the people in the hammock, and hopefully you will, consider that. I hope that also, Mr. Hutchinson has said he wanted to better the community. I haven't received a phone call, a survey, anything. I would love to provide suggestions, and so would the community if he wants to better the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Step right up, please.
Pam Hathaway, Hernandez Avenue in the hammock. First of all, I think you've probably heard from most of us that we're not against developers' rights. I've been in front of the commission board several times, and we are not opposed to the developer or the owner of their rights, just within what is consistent with the neighborhood. I'm a CPA, a practicing CPA. I know the value of businesses in Flagler County. I know that for the state of Florida, sales tax is how we live. We don't have an income tax. So more businesses are great, but within the zoning that is consistent with the neighborhood. I believe that Mr. Hutchinson, who is from, I believe, West Virginia, I looked him up to see your businesses, and he's probably very successful up there. The hammock is different, and I think he could make a difference in our community with a nice business within the RC code. Also, this particular property fronts on, on A1A, but also Sanchez. That's a residential street. And I'm not sure what could go on that road in that property that wouldn't affect the residents there, and I believe one of them just spoke. So just I don't see this any different than the other two applications that have come before you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam.
Dennis Baer, one more time for the Hammock Civic Association. A couple of things. I still haven't heard the staff report address the comp plan requirements under the coastal management element concerning policy E1.1.2. It says within the coastal management area, development in areas of native vegetation will be limited to low-intensity mixed use or low-density residential. And policy E1.1.8, In balancing growth and coastal resources, selected applications of a variety of mechanisms shall be used, including but not limited to buffer zones, restoration, and limiting density and land use intensity. So if we look at the Hammock Wine and Cheese Shop, the original owners of the Hammock Wine and Cheese Shop, good friends of mine, clients of mine, and they basically developed under the RC guidelines. We had to keep, there's a residential lot that's behind Wine and Cheese Shop that we were required to keep residential. So they treated us as though we were RC as we went through the review. The zoning was from the prior owners that predated the comp plan when it was an old car repair shop. And then if you look to the south, the existing gas station that's there isn't even zoned for commercial. So those two projects I don't think should be used as a basis for supporting a change in land use on this particular project, because neither of them were done as part of the comp plan review or the zoning review on your existing comp plan. And as was pointed out, and I don't recall the answer to your question, Mr. Langelo, are these 4 lots bound together or not?
They're not bound.
So definitely the back 2 lots should not be rezoned to a high-intensity commercial use. You know, they could be sold separately, then they would have to access down 17th and down a residential street for access. So again, I mean, maybe this is a project on both properties that just need to kind of go back and simmer a little bit and go back through the process and work with the Scenic A1A folks, and let's see if we can come up with a better project. But right now, I think that to be consistent with your prior vote, again, we don't know the traffic intensities. And while we don't always have to know the intended uses, it just seems to me that it would be a good neighborly gesture if we had a better concept of what was going to occur on these properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Do we have any further comments? Do we have a rebuttal?
So we heard comments that we shouldn't look at the surrounding uses, primarily the Hammock Wine and Cheese Shop to the north and the gas station to the south. But that's exactly what we do when we look at future land use. That's exactly what you do. Ours is a requested change in the future land use consistent with the surrounding uses of the identified property. Here, the answer can't be anything but yes. You've got commercial uses to the north, you've got commercial uses to the south. Now, we can talk about zoning when we get there because there was a lot of conversation about the RC and the C2, and that's not part of our conversation for this application. This application's limited to the future land use. You've got a use to the south, which is non-conforming to our comp plan right now. You've got uses to the east side of the property across A1A, which are consistent with what we're asking for. You've got uses to the north of this property that are consistent with what we're asking for. There was a comment that, okay, if title's not bound, each one of these individual lots could be sold off. And I think staff report has this as just shy of a half an acre. I believe one of our planning board members said earlier, we have to just kind of think this through logically for a second. If we've got 4 lots that comprise less than a half an acre, what are the odds that we're going to sell off one of those 4 lots? It's going to be wholly undevelopable to an individual. So yes, I agree. Commercial access doesn't need to be off a residential road. It needs to be off of A1A. That's where it's designed. It's an arterial roadway. So we believe that based on the surrounding uses, this property is ripe for this type of redevelopment. And again, I'd make the same comment that I made earlier, that this property is in that A1A scenic corridor requirement of, I believe it's between 16th and 18th, 16th and 20th, of this is where we want to cluster the commercial on A1A to provide those community services for these residents. Happy to answer any questions.
I have
Do you have a question, Mr. Langelo? Go right ahead.
I disagree with you when you say that the not binding the titles doesn't cause a problem. Literally, I think you have a problem that way. I think your argument's stronger if they are bound, and would the applicant bound them if they were zoned as commercial?
So the applicant would have to bind it for development purposes.
The answer is yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's all I wanted to know. I agree you would really want to do that, but you didn't offer it, and you've got 4 little lots right now that are 4 individual residential lots that, arguably could be made into 4 different residences on that lot. So you're taking away that impact and making it a single-use impact. controlling it better than as if it was 4 individual lots. So that's why I think it's better if it is bound, treat it as one, make it, you know, it's a lot, there are lots of record right now, and I'm not sure it would even be a lot of record anymore if you put them all together. They would be conforming a lot all the way around.
Incorrect. To go to that point, you know, to make this entire site developable and not have to comply with the setback requirements for this future land use district, we would have to bind the lots together. Otherwise, the physical structure would have to be at the appropriate setbacks with the appropriate buffer on A1A. So for development purposes, I guess is what I was getting after with that, is this property is going to have to be bound and have to do a unity of title so it can be developed.
Okay, thank you. Chairman, I look at this application different than the last, and for the reasons that the applicant stressed, these are all right in a neighborhood of other C2s, and that you know, I heard a comment earlier, and I know that their reasoning was, oh, the parking is really bad at Bronx Pizza. You know, the people are parking all over the place. You know, that's an indication that people in the hammock want that service. If they didn't want the service, they wouldn't be parking there. There wouldn't be people all over the street. They wouldn't be running back and forth doing all the stuff there. And you need that, because if you don't have a zoning area that would service the people in that area, first of all, you put more cars on the road to leave the area, but it also is hurting the people that live there. So I'm not even talking about the individual, you know, landowners' rights. I'm just saying it makes sense that the commercial use be allowed there. And inconsistency is what I was looking at. I think, so there's the argument about the trade-off. It doesn't go back in front of our board for review, but all of the protections for the buffers, for other issues are there. I mean, Mr. Clark's handout clearly states that most of the uses, and if you go into and you say the practical uses, because the size of the lot doesn't accommodate some of the oddball things in here, with the exception of the car wash, which again, at this current time, as we know, it's already been brought out that down the road, if there's a sewer come in there, that could be a possibility. But other than that, most of the other uses are here that could be allowed, whether it's one use or the other. And it just seems to be that it's more consistent to keep the zoning the same right there, because this kind of where you pick and choose, this one has it, this one doesn't. I don't think that's conducive to the neighborhood. I think that's better. I also think that not having 4 individual residential lots like that is really one of the possibilities, that they could stick 4 lots right there and have 4 houses in between these other 2 commercial uses with the supermarket behind them across the street. So I just personally think that this one is different than the other one, and it does have some validity to change the zoning. I think that Mr. Baer's comment about meeting the requirement of the, I'm trying to think of the word for it, you might help me with it anyway, Dennis, the low in the natural land, could you just restate that one part? The comp plan talked about keeping native vegetation.
Yeah, the coastal management element.
Yeah.
And this property does have several very extremely large, at least one in particular that borders Hammock Wine and Cheese property. So,
right. But I mean, tell me though, no matter what this goes, the same amount of trees can come down, the same amount of impact can happen. I mean,
well, but the big difference is if it stays RC, it can come back to you for a special exception, and there's additional
the
review.
Trees, it doesn't protect the fact that trees are native vegetation any more than the other.
But this is your comp plan. These are the
understand
factors that are supposed to be considered in approving a change from a RC low-intensity use or to the future land use map of a higher intensity commercial use. So that's why they're there. And when the gas station was built, you didn't have that. And when a wine and cheese shop was zoned and an auto...
But they're there now. But they're there, and so is the supermarket, so...
If the gas station goes out of business, it reverts back to RC. If you allow this, it is RC.
No, help me with this. I think that
they
if
lose
the
their
gas station
grandfather
goes out
status.
of business, that building can still be used in its current state, correct?
Yeah, it could be used for,
I mean, they don't tear the gas station down and turn it into a residence,
No, but it could be used for it could not be used for a high-intensity commercial use. It couldn't, if it closed down for more than 6 months, where the grandfather clause is, somebody couldn't come back in and reopen it as a gas station. They'd have to do a future land use map amendment, they'd have to do a rezoning.
That
So
would-
you're kind of putting the
correct.
cart before the horse by saying that that's consistent zoning with what they're requesting, because it's not. It's an anomaly that under today's zoning regulations, it couldn't be there unless it was rezoned. And
we do have gas stations on that road, though. There's another one just, I think, just north of that, and gas stations are an important element to a community. You gotta have, so again, service the people who need gas to fill their vehicles up.
I don't disagree with you one bit. However, you'd be putting a gas station on this property and it would be bordering back into commercial. And still they're 4 separate lots. They say they're gonna bind it together. They say this, but usually you're required to bind the lots before you make the application for the rezoning. That's what I've always been required to do before. So that just
Right,
doesn't.
well, that can be a contingency of the approval if that goes that way, though. I mean, all we're doing is recommending one way or the other. Yeah, I mean, that's my only issue we had to consider, I mean, it's like I said, there is some flexibility here. You do consider what the comp plan says, and that was, in all of the argument that I heard on the scenic byway issue, that's the only one that I said, well, maybe that's valid or not, but I'm looking at it, maybe it isn't valid because you're still gonna have the same impact. But maybe, Sean, you could help me with that?
Yes, Mr. Langello and planning board members, if you're inclined to approve the future land use amendment, you mentioned contingencies. It may be worth including with your recommendation to the county commission a request that you get some clarification on this comp plan policy. We were trying before the meeting to think when it has ever been applied, and we couldn't come up with an example. But the language is this, and it's just one sentence. Within the coastal management area, which is essentially the barrier island, development in areas of native vegetation will be limited to low-intensity mixed use or low-density residential. So it's limiting the future land use categories for any area on the barrier island of native vegetation. Does that mean our county commission intended when they adopted this policy once upon a time that vacant lots would never be used for commercial uses? We're not sure. By native vegetation, does that mean any vacant lot? Because even if you were to clear a lot, one day the plants will grow back, and that's native vegetation. Anything non-invasive, I suppose, is native. So we're not quite sure what that means. You try to look to the objective that the policy falls under to maybe get a little clarity on the intent, but we're not sure what it means. But just as it's written, I've provided you the language, and so it's for you to apply as best you can. And again, my recommendation, if you do intend to recommend approval of this future land use amendment, is to include with that a question to the county commission of what is the meaning of this policy and how should we apply it?
Yeah, I mean, I looked at that when I saw that the other day, yesterday, when I read this thing. And I 100% agree. I think, what is native vegetation? As soon as some weed comes up on the ground, that's native to that ground. So that means, for instance, again, something that's well needed and used, and people already commented on it, which was Publix, that wouldn't happen there. Because you would have not, because there's trees there, and there was quite a bit of native vegetation on that lot, and had to come down to put that development in. But people did agree, hey, that looks like a great development, and we need that out there. They just did a good job developing it. And those rules are in effect with the site plan, no matter whether it comes back to us or not. The buffers and the tree protections and all that exist under both the two flume classifications. And so I'm looking at it saying, okay, so the protections that in the audience I keep hearing that they're looking for, most of them don't really affect whatever classification we do here. Now, is that land a little spot thing? Do we try to keep, centralize and keep that development that's going to happen in one area, or do you just, again, make it something that people come in and they, it's kind of at the whim of whoever's in the board? what's allowed and not allowed, and it just becomes a, quagmire down the road. I think the consistency is important, and also not having 4 lots there, individual small lots of record. I think we have another one tonight about, the resident sizes and lots of record becomes problematic too. And, we could clean up one problem by keeping consistent. So that's why I'm more in favor of this one than the last one. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any more questions
I
for this
do.
gentleman?
I agree a lot with what Mr. Langella is saying. I agree a lot with his thinking. My problem with this, though, is that if we do a future land use map change on this section, on these 4 residential lots, we've created another spot zoning, for lack of a better term, in the Hammock. We already have a commercial piece north of it that's C2, that's under a FLUM regulation of mixed use, low intensity. And so now we're creating another island in the Hammock by creating a inconsistent FLUM use in the area just to the south of that. If we start down this road, we're going to be back where we were 40 years ago when everything was a patchwork of development in the Hammock. The reason I thought that we adopted the future land use map for the Hammock was to control future development there in a mixed use, low intensity type of environment. And if we start creating, here's the struggle that I have with this, and this is why I agree largely with Mr. Langella, is that we also have a policy of trying to cluster the commercial developments in the Hammock rather than just spreading them all the way up and down the highway. This is a perfect place for commercial development. And so I agree 100% with I think what the underlying goal here is to turn this into commercial consistent with the neighbors on the north and the south. My reluctance, though, is to impose a future land use regulation that converts it to high-intensity commercial in an area that's designated by design to be medium, low intensity. So my question for you, Adam, is how do we deal with this C2 parcel to the north? I mean, it obviously has an inconsistent FLUM designation. We just, in our last 2 items, said that we couldn't have that, and yet it exists. And so for the future, how do we deal with that?
You can't tell you to ignore it, and at the same time, we can't compel a landowner to change it. I mean, they're basically able to keep swimming on just like they are without any changes, as long as they don't do anything to appreciably change their use. So back to kind of that grandfathered non-conforming, I think that Mr. Bear was wanting me to mention for the parcel to the south, the mixed use low with the RC zoning, the gas station can continue like it is, but if something happens where it's unable to operate, and I guess effectively if the structure is destroyed to a point of 50% or greater, the codes that we have encourage it to become conforming. And on the land use side, I think you'd probably have that same push, but comp plan's not as specific on that. I think that if I'm recalling correctly, we had identified this parcel and several others of parcels that we would identify at some point in the future for administrative amendment that would make them consistent. And that, I think, overall would be good public policy. You've heard that said out loud here. What's good public policy and what isn't? Well, that, I think, is good public policy because you have that consistency.
Well, when you have that inconsistency in our existing map, does the future land use map control if a future owner comes in, wants to change the use, and he says, what I want to do is consistent with C2 zoning, can we deny that on the grounds that it's inconsistent with the land use?
Arguably, you could, yeah, because the land use then would not allow that, and so that's one of those changes I think that would necessitate your land use amendment, that you'd an applicant then seeking something different, a change to that which is already there would require a future land use amendment prior to that happening. If it's denied, that opens up a whole new Pandora's box, if you will.
Well, then, if that's true, then wouldn't we be better served by keeping a consistent flow of land uses along this corridor as per the existing code, rather than create an island that's inconsistent with everything around it under the land use comp plan?
I think you probably heard me when I first talked about this one, is I was talking about commercial use, not necessarily land use or zoning. That, you know, we've got that here. We've got I think even admittedly, you probably heard it from Mr. Clark that when he described the village concept, I'd be hard pressed to say that this isn't part of that. Because you're talking about then a commercial use on this piece between two commercial uses. Admittedly, if the applicant's wanting to come in and ask for a C2 set versus the RC special exception set, that's something for you all to evaluate as a recommending body, this one being a legislative application for the land use amendment, the next one being the quasi-judicial for the rezoning. If you think they've demonstrated their case, then decide how you want to. But I think that maybe I'm not answering your question, but I think there's an argument for that in the affirmative here in this situation as opposed to the previous two applications.
Well, that and I think we've heard a lot of discussion tonight about how if we impose the overlay of the scenic corridor and we impose the requirements of the comp plan, and we look at what's left in terms, and we impose the setbacks and the other restrictions associated with development along A1A, and we distill that, we end up with a list of uses that are just as available under the existing RC and the existing comp plan as they would be under C2, with a change and a creation of an island in the comp plan that is inconsistent with everything around it. Am I reading that correctly?
I don't know if I'd conclude that, but I think it's been stated by others with the public, and you've got the listing. I'd say depend on what I provided to you as part of the packet before you look at what's been submitted then as part of the discussion item for the record. But admittedly, there are similar uses. I think, again, realizing that the RC does require the special exception, that's another process. It's another mode of control.
Okay. Well, back to that point then. I really think that this is an ideal location for a commercial use. I have a lot of heartburn under changing the comp plan in order to accommodate that.
Mr. Chairman, Sconley, I think you're 100% right. I think that the issue of this has to do with, we got spot zoning either way. You sort of have it right now. You already have other C2s right in that neighborhood.
I agree with that. We want to do more?
Right. Well, one of the things we also have on this one is we have 4 residential lots, which bothers me. I mean, you can stick right in the middle of this, in this area, 4 residential lots if the gentleman wants to develop it that way. The other problem with it is, too, is that when this code was written, I mean, I've been here for 43 years. My folks came here decades and decades before that. But the hammock wasn't hardly anything. And when we put the zoning in place, again, it wasn't what it is today. The hammock is growing. More and more people are coming there. So some of this does change. I mean, I know everyone hates that. I hate change, because they like it just the way they were when they came. Believe me, if it was the way it was when I came, there'd be an empty room out here, But that isn't the way it is. So we're trying to balance this out. And I think that to create, and I like the word, the village concept, but to create that, to put this commercial where it's going to be needed. Like I said, I mean, why is Brock Pizza so busy, and why are all these uses being used, and why do people want to do it? Because people need that use. Put them in that area and make that a consistent zoning. I think if the guy who owns that gas station was going to have any idea about doing anything, he'd come in here and ask for the same zoning. And so when the other one on the corner, they would all want that to keep it consistent, and then it would open up the possibilities. I just don't know if the protection of the coming back and coming to our board, which is where a lot of people seem to think that that's really going to give them that protection, is really going to do what they think it is. I don't think it will. I think that the same amount of trees will come down. They're still going to get a beautiful buffer. It has to meet a bunch of regulations. It's just, are we going to have, for residential lots that may have the possibility of commercial or not happening on that lot? Or is it just going to be a consistent commercial use? But I also have the problem with the C2. I wish there was a compatible, hammock zoning that would just not make all these things special exceptions in RC and allow the owner some, some knowledge in advance, some sense that he knows what he can do going into it, and allowing that normal progression to happen in commercial. Because when it's RC like this, it is difficult. It makes it difficult for the owner and or potential buyer, anyone, to do anything down the road. And it sometimes, so something that could have happened there good doesn't happen because people don't want to mess with it. And maybe somebody, came out of the woodwork because this guy wants to sell it cheap because he has and he put something out that wasn't so good. I don't know if the keeping it RC protects what the people think it's going to protect.
Yeah, I agree with that. But, compatible commercial use is not going to be more intense than low, medium intensity. It can't happen. Can't happen on this parcel with all four of them together because it's not big enough even with all four of them combined.
Right.
It can't happen because of the scenic overlay. It can't, so why do it? Why create a perception of intensive commercial development in an area where it can't happen? And so why change the future land use map? I think a more realistic approach would be for the applicant to come back and say, all right, I want C1 or O1 or something consistent with low intensity or medium intensity development rather than C2, which is inconsistent with everything in the area and probably not something that he can utilize anyway. So I agree. I think this is a perfect place for commercial development. It's just not intensive commercial development.
Right, but like you said, though, it won't be intensive for the most part, just with the exception of the future car wash that might happen.
Well, right.
That is one area that, and
When
again,
they buy the Hammock Wine and Cheese Shop and then they have the whole corner, I get.
Right. But the other, like I said, why do it? I think eliminating 4 residential lots is one, and giving it some consistency to allow that natural progression of development and encourage it there versus up and down the road in other places. I don't think it opens Pandora's box, though. I mean, we already just saw it, as we saw it tonight. The first one did not open, and now we're talking about a second one, whether it happens or doesn't happen. If you give one, doesn't mean you're going to give the other. But yeah, I think again, this is a policy decision about how that hammock should be developed. And I think that the development, the zoning that we have in place doesn't 100% work anyway. I think, personally, I think that needs to be looked at in whole up there. I think there's some other, lots of record up there are problems. People own lots up there. There's a lot, I don't know how many lots we have in the hammock, but there's a lot of future development that could happen on all those lots. And people talk about keeping it the way it is, but all those streets, everything behind there, people could be tearing those trees down, putting houses up right and left in there. And so, that there is no real protection against not taking a tree down in that regard. There's actually probably more of it in commercial than anywhere else. But anyway, I don't know if anybody else had any comment on it.
Anybody have another comment? Any comment, questions?
I agree with both of you guys, and that's why it's a hard decision, but we have to make one. I don't know if that helps us out at all, but it definitely is a location that makes sense for C2. But I'm also I also hear Tim in regards to the pause to actually take that leap and move it to it. It's a tough one. I'm undecided right now.
Discuss it any further? Do you have any other comments?
Backed right up to a residential road, like they were saying. So now we're putting high-intensity commercial traffic as second entrance into a business up and down another residential road in our very quiet hammock.
Well,
don't think that
perhaps
this
you don't know if that would be approved for an entrance back there, depending on what they come with. That would be later, so may or not be an access back there.
Okay.
But I like the idea of, I think that we wanted to accomplish clustering commercial, is certainly would do it.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion.
Let's ask if do we have any other questions for the gentleman?
I don't.
No? Do you? Anybody? All right, sir, thank you so much.
Thank you, board members.
So we'll bring it back to the board.
Can I ask?
Sure.
You were talking about putting the lots together. Does
Yeah, I
that
think,
help us?
first of all, I think unified title is an important element of this thing anyway.
Like,
Which you said he had to do in order to develop it anyway, so that's kind of moot, right? Because if they have to combine those to develop it, and we
Well,
already know he wants to develop it, we know that's going to happen.
It's not that it has to happen, it makes practical sense that it happens.
Okay.
Right.
Unify it, it's not, you don't have to question that anymore, it is one piece. You could make it a sort of you could take one little corner and stick it out and put a residence on it down the road, so well, I still got a commercial property, I still want to develop it this way. You may hurt yourself in your design of the development because you got setbacks, but
Right.
you could still do it.
Okay.
right, okay, never mind.
I just think that, again, I think this issue needs to be looked at by the commission. I think to push it up to them with a couple of recommendations. I mean, all we're doing is recommending, so we recommended no on one, and I think I would make a recommendation that we recommend to approve with the two contingencies. One is that they do have unified title to put them together, and two, that they, as Mr. Moylan talked about, that they clarify what the comp plan, I don't know if it, comp plan classifier policy was about that the native vegetation and how that in effect really works, because it doesn't make any sense. And if you take that one element out, then he does meet the requirements. Now it's just whether or not it fits. And if that requirement is something that the commission has a better grasp for, and they say, no, you don't meet that, and, go away, then it goes away. But at least it brings it up to them, and they can maybe start looking at, what that, zoning should be in the hammock and how this should be worked out. I do think that the lots right next to them, whether this one is approved tonight or not, will come in for that C2 down the road. If I own the land, that's what I would do. I already have a commercial use on it, and there's commercial all the way around it. I would make it consistent. It just makes more sense than, why keep it as a special exception? You're already 95% down the road, but I don't think by doing this, we're going to create some high-intensity commercial that the neighborhood would really have a problem with. And I know they don't probably see it that way, but I don't think that's what's going to happen here. I just think that this is something that should be looked at. So I would make that motion with the two contingencies.
All right, so.
I'll second the motion.
All right, so we've heard from, again, staff, we've heard from the applicant, the owner, and of course, the public, and we have a motion on the table, and that is to approve application number 3350. We have a second motion on the table. Do we have any further discussions on those motions?
Is there a second?
Boyd.
So, no discussion, but another question for staff. Is there another way to look at this? That is, I think we're all in agreement this is an ideal location for a commercial. It's surrounded by commercial. It's on a corner. It meets all our criteria for cluster development of commercial in the hammock and those sorts of things. Is another way to look at this is if we change the land use designation for this parcel, is that could that consistently lead to a land use change of the surrounding parcels so that we lock in the notion that we want to cluster develop commercial? Is that good land planning thinking, or am I just making up legal arguments?
Yeah, I think that's good land planning thinking as far as the use to the north, maybe, well, I'd say for the gas station to the south. I guess I couldn't come up with a compelling reason to exclude them from this if that kind of is put in motion, that it would make sense that those that are existing, effectively grandfathered non-conforming would be made conforming, would be made whole likely through some action, potentially as part of our comprehensive plan update, that would be something that would come forward. You anticipate with any time, sidebar, Mr. Moylan just turned to me and said, it coincide with an EAR, with an evaluation and appraisal report. These are those checks that you're supposed to do periodically when you look back at how effective your land use plan has been. I can't explain to you now, sitting here, other than just it's happened as it happened, of why these two, to the north and the south, aren't consistent. And so the obvious question would be is how come it wasn't fixed before if that was the case? And I suppose if I was taking an alternative argument, it would be, well, maybe that was intentional not to fix them that way because you'd want them to be in some way non-conforming. One, non-conforming zoning-wise with an inconsistent land use. The one to the south, arguably with both pieces being inconsistent. You have both an inconsistent land use and an inconsistent zoning for an existing commercial use. So I think you have a good case for that if that's put in motion with this as far as a commercial high-intensity future land use for having both the parcel to the north and to the south being then ultimately designated in a similar fashion in the future, if anything, through a recommendation as part of a comprehensive plan update or an evaluation appraisal report, ultimately left to the board to determine the merits of that when they're evaluating that change. It would not be an automatic. It would also involve, for the record, it would involve the consent of the landowner.
But give us a basis for that kind of decision-making on this particular area.
It makes sense.
And an inconsistent decision on some other location in the hammock.
Correct.
Thank you.
All right, just for the record, once again, we have a motion by Mr. Langelo and a second by Mr. Boyd to approve application number 3350. All those in favor?
With two contingencies.
Mr. Langella, can you repeat the conditions?
With conditions.
One condition was that the unified title to one lot, and the second one that the board clarify, the county commission clarify the policy and the comp plan that talked about the native vegetation and development of the low use or whatever when this has not been what we've seen in the past. So that particular policy needs to be, I'm pointing it out, as Mr. Moylan talked about, I'm pointing it out and saying, hey, clarify this, if we got it wrong, then we got it wrong. If you guys have some understanding of it that we don't know, talk about it, bring it out, and everyone will know what you're talking about, but it doesn't seem to make sense on the face of it. Just sort of bringing out talking about what this issue is in the motion to the commission. The only way that we can get it up to the commission is make it in the motion.
What about with a continuance? Would a continuance be of order to make the recommendation for their clarification on the comp plan for the native vegetation? And
well, the continuance would stay here, and then it wouldn't go to the.
So it can't go to the.
No, it doesn't. I mean, well, no. If we continue it, it really doesn't go anywhere. If we deny it, it can go up there. I mean, but if they continue it, it's sort of stuck in quagmire here without a resolution. I mean, I think we've discussed it. I think the audience has given a lot of input. They have the ability to go at that meeting as well, and that, this is now, they're going to look at this question and be able to resolve, that inconsistency. That's why I think Mr. Moylan's recommendation makes sense, and this was my question, is put it in your recommendation so that the commission has to address it somehow, because other than that, they're not addressing it.
Mm-hmm. I understand.
So we have a motion to approve and a second with conditions. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. Nay. The ayes have it. Motion is approved, and application 3350 passes.
I don't know if they got the count.
Just for clarity, Mr. Chairman, so that was 5-2, was that correct? Yourself and Ms. Haywood being the nays?
Is that correct? Yeah, 5-2. You got that, Gina? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next item is number 6, quasi-judicial requiring disclosure of ex parte communication, application number 3351. Do we have any disclosures to make? Seeing none, the application is for rezoning from RCE Residential Limited Commercial District to C2 General Commercial and Shopping Center District. Adam, can you please present?
Companion application to the previous one. This is the rezoning that goes along with the 3350 future land use amendment. And so we'll go very quickly through these slides. And that, again, for the record, that the rezoning is dependent on the future land use map amendment being approved. If it is not ultimately approved, the rezoning does not go into effect. So that you do have some kind of codependency here with these. 3 possible outcomes here: approval of application 3351, rezoning, finding that the request is consistent with the Comprehensive Plan Land Development Code, and then we have subject to development not to commence until land use becomes effective, and then other conditions added as part of your recommendation. Denial of application 3351 on a finding that it's not consistent with the Flagler County Comprehensive Plan and the Land Development Code, or the third option, continuance. Recommendation for continuance, continuance of the item here, the prior to the approval or the denial being recommendations being made to the Board of County Commission. Continuance would keep it here, would have it returning to the planning board for some item that either the staff or the applicant would provide that would help you make your decision in some future date. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll close. Wait any questions or comments. Submit my report for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any, for the board members, any questions with staff before I go ahead with the applicant? Nope. Seeing none, applicant, can you please come up and present?
So very much like the last conversation that we just had, looking at the surrounding uses, we believe it's appropriate to grant this property the C2 zoning designation based on, well, the fact that the Hammock Wine and Cheese Shop is showing as C2 zoning, and the use directly to the south is compliant with C2 zoning, and Publix across the road, east side of A1A, is compliant with Z2 zoning. Happy to answer any questions staff or y'all may have.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Any questions for staff? Okay, I'm opening it up to the public. If you would like to comment, please come up. State your name and where you live.
I'm still Dr. Lynn Rosewater, and I still live in the Hammock. I feel like there's some misconception that's going on, because when you come up, Mr. Mangle, and say this meets the plan, the comprehensive development plan, the overlay for the hammock overrides the other parts of that plan. That's how it was put in there, because the hammock is a very different entity than the rest of Flagler County. You have a heavily wooded barrier island that's got all kinds of wonderful natural elements to it. And so to say this was allowed commercial before this code was put on top of it does not make sense to me. Because the reality is, if they came up with this specifically because they said, wait a minute, what's going on in the hammock? There's not anything going on to protect it. So to go backwards and to say, oh, it's okay, we can have this mishmash, this was put in there for that purpose. Therefore, I disagree with the fact that you're saying that meets the comp plan, because that's in the comp plan.
Talk to the chair, please.
Okay, so I'm just saying, I feel like there's a real misunderstanding going on of there's a scenic overlay. It exists. It was put in to protect the hammock. If there were things done before, that is why it was put in to protect the hammock. And it seems to me that that's not something that's recognized. And so I find that problematic, because that was the whole desire, that there should be protection for the hammock. And that some of the things that happened is why they came up with this. That they put in something that was business-related that really didn't belong on A1A. And so you are looking, this is going to be damaging to the hammock. And I think that I don't know how people don't know what these things are, or how they don't get mentioned, or how they don't get talked about. But I need to say, I think it's very problematic. And I think that when you deal with the hammock like it's any other part of Flagler County, that's why that overlay was put in there, to say it is different. It has different needs. It is, the county is now going to ecotourism, where we can bring people in and make use of the fact that you've got something that's not available anywhere else. The number of barrier islands that are still protected and wooded don't exist. So I'd like that to be a part of your thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Leah Groom, living right behind this area. I just kind of wanted to say that I was illustrating the parking because we had brought it up during the special circumstance, and it just, it was pushed through without appropriate parking. So that was my point with that. I also believe that having it RC protects the residents. So you guys were talking about the Wine and Cheese and the gas station. The Wine and Cheese has a residence on Sanchez. There is a mobile home on Sanchez. So the two backlots are surrounded by residents. So yes, they're surrounded by commercial, and we're not trying to deny any commercial. We're saying no C2 zoning, because that would bring the traffic into Sanchez, as was already mentioned, which would not be a good thing. Again, I myself and a neighbor walked and got close to 1,000 residents in the area expressing the idea that they did not want the zoning change. It's not about a car wash, we know that. We're talking about a zoning change. The RC protects us as residents. That's what the people said. So I am saddened and hurt because I have to take this lesson back to my students, saying that our voices weren't heard. I submitted the petition. You guys can read the comments. It's not about a car wash, it's about this zoning. So I do hope you reconsider, and I hope that the commission doesn't listen to your recommendation about this particular rezoning. I find it quite unfortunate that you'll not have rezoning in one area, but rezone in another area, because you're basing it on these two commercial properties in the front, but you're not thinking about the two lots in the back that are surrounded by residents that go right into a residential area. Thank you.
Hello again. Laura Stillman, 51 Flagler Drive. A couple of items came up in my mind during the previous on the amendment, and unfortunately we were already past the public comment, but it still applies here. I'm going back again to my time on City Council and working with our Planning and Zoning Board, with our building zoning exceptions that we would talk about. And I want to bring up again, I had said, be careful of how far in the future you're thinking. You've got 4 lots right now. If they choose to keep them apart, one thing you do have a problem with, the reason why you'd want them together, is you don't know what's going to happen in our technology in the next 20 years. You don't know what's going to happen in 10 years. Who would ever have thought back in the 80s we'd all be walking around with computers in our hands called cell phones? You need now battery chargers for cars. Who's going to say they're not going to put a battery charging station on one of those lots? You don't know. You can't see the future. Technology is racing ahead. So you've got to really be careful, but that's also why you want to be careful about making this a high intensity. You don't know what's going to come up in the future. Plus, something else that came to mind is I agree in most cases that you want to cluster the same zoning together, but there's always exceptions, and this might be the exception because high intensity tends to also equate to higher traffic. If you cluster them all together on the A1A, where we're not going to be widening, we're not going to be adding in traffic lights, now you've got even more cars all coming out close to each other onto the A1A, and this one's trying to go to the north, and this one's going to the south, and it's already a little bit dangerous out there, even with a turn lane, a middle lane that helps with turning. You get up into that section, and you've got people who are not paying attention. They're getting ready to pull out in front of you, and they don't see that you're slowing down to turn another way, or you're both coming out at the same time, and you're going to cross. I mean, you just go to like Citgo, and there's two ways in and out, and people are going like this, both trying to come out at the same time, but to go to opposite ways. So maybe this is not the time you want to cluster a high intensity with more vehicles. Just a thought. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know for sure. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, ma'am.
3 hours late, Dennis Bear for Hammock Hammock Civic Association, I apologize. I guess my question, I'm not going to repeat a lot of my comments from earlier. What are they hiding? You know, here's the application for rezoning. If I submit an application for rezoning tomorrow, copy of the warranty deed, authorization from the owner, boundary survey, 33 sets of plans meeting all requirements of the Flagler County Land Development Code. We don't have any plans. And I don't know if Mr. Mengel's now saying that only applies to a PUD, but I've applied for rezonings before. I had to submit a site plan. We're going to put a shop here. We're going to put a store here. So then they want to go to C2 where there's no additional review. So we don't know what they're putting on there. I do know because the owner tried to buy the wine and cheese shop next door, and I represented the owner, and he had a 1031 exchange. So they're just trying to increase the value of the property, high intensity use, and flip it. Or, you know, but normally you come in for a rezoning because you have a specific intended use for the piece of property. And that's why I don't think that this application is sufficient, because we don't have a site plan that meets the requirements of Flagler County land development regulation, or the application process. And that's been a requirement for years and years and years and years since I've been doing land use here since 1985. And as Mr. Connor pointed out, there are other uses other than RC that are less intensive than a C2 that could go on this particular piece of property. And under the Snyder decision, Florida Supreme Court, that deals, it's kind of our landmark decision that deals with rezonings, a landowner is not entitled to the highest possible density on his property. You all have to take in consideration the circumstances. And just a final comment, following up on the good doctor who just spoke, it's really kind of a rabbit hole here, because the wine and cheese shop is zoned commercial, but it has a future land use designation of low intensity. Then if you go to the south, the gas station is zoned RC, has a low intensity use designation on the future land use map, but it's a C2 use on the property. So you're kind of bootstrapping, saying, okay, this is consistent with the adjacent properties because those future land use map designations aren't consistent and they wouldn't allow this use. So I appreciate your attention tonight. This is, you know, one of those land use issues that seem to spring up from time to time in our county, but my recommendation, like I said before, this one needs to go back to the drawing board. We need more specifics about what they plan on doing with the property. Or, as was done before on the Hammock Harbor, you know, make it come back for us. If it does get rezoned to a higher intensity, it still has to come back for a special exception. You've done that before, you can do it again. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any further comments from the public?
Jody Bollinger, I live in the Hammock. The fact that we don't know what's going to go on the property, it just kind of makes me think that this whole rezoning is just a way to avoid going through the special exception process. And Mr. Langelo you commented that you didn't think that even going through special exception really helped things. But if I look at what you're supposed to look at for a special exception, it mentions such things as ingress to and from to the property shall provide for automotive and pedestrian safety and convenience. Talks about off-street parking shall be located to minimize economic noise, glare, and odor effects on adjacent and nearby properties. And I'm sure that the folks who live on Sanchez would like the Planning and Development Board to look at those things. Number 9 says, the economic effect of the proposed use on adjacent and nearby properties shall be positive. I'm not sure if we go to C2 and we don't look at it as a special exception, that the folks who live near the property are going to feel like the economic effect is going to be positive for them. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Do we have any further comments from anyone else? So we'll go back to the applicant if you want to come up and rebuttal.
Like Mr. Bear, I will keep this rather brief as we are getting late in the tooth this evening. 2 things that I just really wanted to talk about for a second. The first comment that seems to be keep recurring is parking. Whatever is ultimately constructed on that site is going to have to comply with our land development code for the required number of parking spaces. So I look at the parking and it's like, yes, we want more parking. That's fine. We'll comply with the code. If the code changes, applicant will be required to comply with the code when they apply for a building permit and they go through the site plan process. As for the special exception requirement, it's not that the applicant is looking to avoid applying for a special exception. What it is the requirements that are necessary for a special exception application, and its unpredictability in its application, not only, well, by the county, I'll leave it at that, that leaves uncertainty. No owner of the property can go and try to get plans put together or anything like that without going through a large amount of engineering that you'd normally see associated with a planned unit development that comes in with a concept plan that's attached that says, hey, we're going to have an amenity center here, we're going to have community garbage there. That's a lot to ask for half an acre. Now, I entirely understand the neighbors wanting to know what use is going to be made of this property, but just like all their surrounding neighbors, they can build anything that's permissible as a matter of right under that zoning designation. So there is no requirement that, hey, this is exactly what we're going to do. You heard from Mr. Bears read from the application for a rezoning and says 33 sets of plans. We also heard him say that you need boundary survey. So what type of plans are we talking about? And we turn to our land development code as it discusses rezoning, and it doesn't require us to submit a site plan. So there's nothing nefarious, and I understand that Mr. Bear has been here much longer than some of us, and he has had to do it that way. But the code doesn't hold the applicant to that restriction for this type of application. So with that, I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions for y'all.
Thank you. Do any one of us here up here, members, have a question for him? Just say. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so do we have any questions, further questions for Adam?
No, I just want to make a statement if I could. I respect Dennis, and but here's my point. I heard this from several people tonight. If the applicant was to come up and have given us a specific use that they wanted to do, they came in and they'd say, we want to put a quiet yoga shop on that property. We would do the same exact steps, and then they'd come back in and be able to put anything on the C2. So whether or not they come in and ask us and say, this is what I intend to do, anything would be allowed and under that zoning classification. I don't know if that necessarily helps the fact that they would come in. I mean, he may have been, genuine and say, I want to put the quiet yoga, and we couldn't make it work, and then somebody else bought it out and wanted to put, ice cream shop, and that's what it would be. So I don't know if coming in with a specific use actually, and I think, Adam, you even said we should not be looking at that in our thing. I can see why it would not help, because it leads you down a path to think that that is what will happen, but it's not. So I don't think that's a reason to make him come back again and go through the whole step, because I don't think it's going to give us anything. I think one other thing I said before, and again, I live up there, and I've lived there for a long time, And I don't think that the change of this zoning is going to affect the people the way they think. The trees can still come down if we would have kept the zoning. If we keep the land, the same amount effect can have on the development. This is not a clear cut of taking all the trees down, where the other way all the trees would stay up. I don't think that's not true. And as we heard, when you bring in a site plan, whether it comes to us, in this case it wouldn't, it would have to go to staff. They have to meet all the parking regulations and the buffers and all the stuff that we would in effect hear, they would have to hear for that. So I don't think the protection is there that the people want.
Have any more comments on this side?
I have a couple of comments. I continue to struggle with this. I agree with Mr. Langello, but at the same time, when we opened the door with the recommendation of a land use change, we did so with conditions. One of the conditions was that these 4 lots be bound. Well, that hasn't occurred yet. One of the conditions was that we have a better understanding of what the coastal code requirements are regarding preserving natural vegetation. We don't have that direction yet. So while we've opened the door a crack with the change to the land use map and the potential for this area to become a cluster of commercial development consistent with our goals for the hammock, I'm not sure I'm willing to swing the door wide open, and I'm not sure this board should swing the door wide open to individually change the zoning on these 4 little lots and let all of them go forward as C2 commercial pieces of property. Once we get some clarity from the developer or the owner as to what this real intentions are regarding this property, maybe we could go to an intensive zoning change, but I don't think this board should go there tonight.
I could add to that, and I agree with Tim. We cracked the door open, so to speak, and we gave our recommendation for the commissioners to amend the future land use, but that doesn't bound us to have to approve this application to rezone. That puts the ball in their court to make a decision for the amendment of the future land use and see what they say there. And then furthermore, once that's determined, then the applicant can come back to us for the rezoning and hopefully bring us a more clear picture of what they plan on doing with the property and move forward that way.
Why wouldn't we just have
If I
the
could,
same?
I think one of the, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, onto your comment, Tim, why wouldn't we just have the same conditions attached to this approval as we did the other?
Disapproval.
I think in effect, that's what's going to happen. We're only recommending. So if we bring this up and they agree with the flume change, they would also have the same ability not to rezone it. I think it's sort of dizzying for us to send it up there and say, well, look at this thing, the clustering, and this thing should be looked at this way. But by the way, don't change the zoning on it. I think it kind of be more confusing to them. They have that ability. If they find that flume change shouldn't happen, they won't do it. And then at that point, the zoning wouldn't happen anyway. And the same argument would be if they think the flume change is correct, but this should be a different zoning, which was not presented tonight, that both the applicant and the audience and staff would all have that ability to bring it up and have that conversation. But it really isn't for us to make the decision. We're just a recommending body. So whatever we do, we're going to send it right back to them anyway. Might as well just give it to them at this point and say, look at this thing. You have inconsistencies. This is what the vision probably should be for it, but it's up to you guys. You're the policymakers. Do it. If they don't think this should change, they won't do it. But I just think if we send a affirmative on the one and don't do the affirmative on the other, it would be more confusing to them.
I think the confusion ought to be clear. I think what we send up to the Board of County Commissioners ought to be a clear message that we are totally confused with what to do with this because we have competing policy decisions, and we think perhaps we could open the door to cluster development if that's really the goal, the policy goal of Flagler County, is to use cluster commercial development in the hammock, then we're going to open the door for that BOCC, but we're not ready to allow a wholesale use of this particular piece of property as C2 when we have no better understanding of what they want to do with the property, and it's 4 separate parcels instead of 1. So I think the confusion that we send to the BOCC is exactly what the message we should send.
Well, again, we should, the first recommendation is that we unify title. And I think maybe the other contingency or this contingency on this, I guess I don't know the right word at this moment, would be that this application is needing a policy decision from the board on how they want to develop the hammock. So if the ultimate decision from them is to cluster that, then we're saying that, look, this is what we think you should do. But if they say, no, this makes total sense to leave it as an RC or put it to a different zoning, that gives it to them. I don't see them taking our recommendation to approve the flume and then deny the zoning to help them at all. I think it makes it more confusing to them. So I would personally think that, again, the other 2 lot owners on both sides would most likely follow suit and change their zoning and make this what it, or, you have the hotel just north of that, that's another C2, make that little cluster that belongs there, let them put in the pedestrian and other, protections that they need in that particular area that they would want, because you've clustered it together. Tell them in this action, look at this. I think if we tell them that you don't change the zoning, I don't know if, I just think it's more confusing, that's all. I mean, either way, it's not our decision, we just make a recommendation tonight. And no matter how we would recommend on any of these items, they can do whatever they want to, and go with us or against us. So maybe the solution is we do put the same contingency and also the contingency to clarify how the future, clustering development should look in the hammock, when they make this decision. Mr. Moylan, is that possible to make a recommendation with that the board review this policy in consistency with I don't know, maybe make it simple, with good development, future development in the hammock, that this lot be changed and possibly the other lots be changed as well? Yes.
Are you referring to the neighboring
Well, I
lots?
mean, if the idea is to keep this consistency, right now, the only thing that's inconsistent is the fact that the other 2 lots aren't consistent in their zoning. That's what's inconsistent right now, is that you have an RC zoning with commercial uses on those lots. So can we make a recommendation that the board look at the consistency of the zoning on those, and not in this item, but the other ones in their policy? Or is that
I don't think
overstepping the
so.
bounds of what we're allowed to do?
It's possible for the county commission to actually change zoning on a broad scale as a legislative matter, like all up and down A1A, but you're talking about a sort of a narrow vicinity. It would have to be owner-driven. That is, a rezoning of the neighboring parcels would have to be, an application submitted by the property owners. But I think that the concept, though, that the clarity you're seeking is, we'll get that from the flume, the matter we just heard with those conditions. And we're hearing the discussion here, and we'll bring these questions to the county commission through that flume application. I'm not sure what you're saying would be the best approach, although we all want to get the answer to that.
Well, I think that's right. I think that we don't have to send a package deal up. We can float the balloon, we can put conditions on it as we've done, we can seek clarity, and then we can send the message that we're not prepared to recommend a change of the zoning at this point in time because we don't have that clarity yet. And I don't think that it may be confusing, but it's not inconsistent if you give them the notion that the planning board has struggled with this. We like the policy of cluster development of commercial in the hammock. We like the policy of locating that cluster development at intersections. We like the location that this presents, but it's 4 individual lots, and we're not ready to turn 4 individual lots into C2 zoning on the back of a residential area before we have more clarity on what the policy really should be. I think that's a consistent message, even though it may be confusing. And that's what I think we should do. So I'm going to make a motion to deny the zoning request.
I second.
Yeah, okay, so I was going to say.
I second.
All right. So as we stand here today after deep discussion, again, we have a motion to deny, and we have a second motion to deny application number 3351. All those in favor?
If I could make the one discussion here. Tim, I'm going to actually vote with you, only to find out whether or not giving the commission a confusing message works or not. I think ultimately, it doesn't matter one way or the other, in effect, how we really vote.
You may be right.
You know, but I'm hoping staff, and I can see Adam, he just wiped his hand like, oh, well, how am I going to explain this one? But maybe that is the problem, is you'll have to explain it, is why a board went with one thing and then the accompanying thing, which should have been approved one way, is being denied because of the issue of both the clarity and that the future look at that hammock. So in that regard, like I said, I don't agree, but I think, what the heck, let's see if this makes the.
He agrees to
Yeah.
disagree.
Yeah.
Basically. All right, so again, we have a motion and a second to deny application number 3351. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
So the ayes have it. Application 3351 is denied. Next item is number 7, quasi-judicial requiring disclosure of ex parte communication. That's application number 3384, front setback variance in the agricultural district. Adams, can you please present on this one?
Yes, sir. You've got the graphic included in your packet, and so that I have it here on display. The access is through an easement from County Road 2006 east to the north. And so here's the future land use, agriculture and timberlands. Zoning is agriculture, so we have consistency there. No inconsistent land use or zoning. The flood zone comes back with a no flood, special flood hazard area zone X. And then our soils are both fine sands, so as you can imagine, no wetlands there. And then what they're requested, again, knowing this is oriented to the north arrow's up at the top, 2006 is further up. So what you have here, requested detached garage separated from the house in the AC district. We don't have that 10-foot requirement for separation between the home and an accessory. That's only in residential districts. AC is not agriculture district's not considered a residential zoning district. Don't have that to worry about. We do have a 50-foot front setback. We've got to choose a front, we've got to choose a rear, we've got to have two sides. And so with this, having the access off of that north end, the front by default ends up being that north lot line that legitimately isn't on County Road 2006. It doesn't have any frontage at all on County Road 2006. There's an easement that they use to access the property. So we're applying that 50-foot setback from that front property line using air quotes you can't see. And then they've come back and proposed the garage at a 32-foot. So effectively looking for 18-foot variance from our requirement. We've contended in here, we've mentioned in this, there's sufficient land elsewhere to put the garage. You don't have to stick it right there. I think there's probably good rationale for the garage going there because the access is close to the front. This is the front of the property. So for us to point and say you should put it someplace to the south may not make good intuitive sense. Here's that aerial that they submitted in response back to some of our comments on this, showing that in a different graphical format with the overlay of the photo kind of superimposed there with it. And mainly the contention there from the owners is that you got the proximity to the dwelling for the garage, it makes sense. Front yard setback is somewhat arbitrary because of the access by the easement, not a direct roadway frontage, and this is a before-the-fact variance. We got to take that in consideration too. These folks aren't asking for forgiveness. They submitted a building permit and then are then attempting to make their plans match what their intent is. So, got three options for you with this. One being approval, finding that the 18-foot front north yard setback variance is appropriate, all the conditions are met, and so that 18-foot variance from the minimum 50-foot front yard setback for the proposed garage at 244 East County Road 2006. You can deny this. In that finding, you would say that the criteria have not been met, and therefore the 18-foot variance is denied, or you can continue it to some future date for either staff or the applicant to come up with whatever questions you may have on this. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll close, await any questions or comments, and the applicant is present still for any presentation you want from them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Adam. Will the applicant please come up and, good evening, just state your name and your address.
Ryan Nelson, 6A Pine Hill Lane, Palm Coast.
Thank you.
So, as stated, we are asking for permission. We're not asking for forgiveness. We, as you can see here on the overlay, we're not impeding anybody else's property. There's not going to be any eyesore, if you will, if we're granted the ability to develop the structure in this location. I could argue there's plenty of eyesore on that road, I guarantee you, but it's not going to be coming from us. So I have spoken with all my neighbors. I haven't seen any opposition. I don't see any of my neighbors here tonight. I don't see anybody with, shirts, Save County Road 2006 East. So we're clearly not going to be affecting anybody directly. A lot of my neighbors, I know 3 of them. I don't know anybody who has a problem with this, anybody who would have a problem with this. So moving forward, as also stated, we do have easement off my neighbor's property, and with this being a garage as well as storage facility, it would make sense to put it close to the easement, as what we decided as a plot location for these 2 structures, being the house is already currently under construction and the garage still being supposed, is that we bought this land as is from someone who lived off the grid and took no care of it. This land has terrible drainage. While this is not in a floodplain, it floods in the rain. Again, with that being an issue due to drainage. Now, that we saw a soil map, and with all due respect, I don't know where that came from because that is not accurate. I'd have never even heard of those 2 types of soils. And I know that because I dug up this land myself recently, coming from the East County Road 2006 down my neighbor's easement and then to the house, as I had to install underground conduit for underground power that's going to be coming in a few weeks. This is all gray clay that with the minor tiny bit of rain turns to a consistency of soft serve ice cream. We've gotten heavy machinery stuck, we've gotten cars stuck. I've gotten a tractor with 6-inch or 6-foot tires with 5-inch paddle tread stuck in this supposed Sierra fine sand, whatever. This is gray clay that is terribly impassable. So when we chose the plotted specifics for the land, if we could bring up the site plan back again, we chose the highest areas with the best drainage, with the house being in on the west side and the garage supposed going on the north side in that corner where we have the best drainage. We don't currently have the means and resources to do further site development to allow for proper drainage, as well as, let's say we did a lot with the proper setbacks in that specific area. Now, I did come prepared, very structured. So if you will, if the house is here and the garage is here, proper setback would put the garage right in front of the house, essentially blocking off safe means of egress. I understand there's not necessarily any need for separation for structures in that area, but again, this is going to be our home, our dwelling. So not only would it create a dangerous means of egress at times, it would be quite an eyesore with what we're building as our future home. So it's also been discussed, or was also stated, that there is substantial room on the property. But again, with poor drainage, it's very it would not be good placement anywhere else on the property other than what is already established as good drainage areas. So next, let's say we did just arbitrarily pick it up and put it any other place on the property. I understand from what I've seen tonight that future plans being stated is something of importance, and unfortunately we did leave that out, as my future wife has big aspirations of livestock ownership in the future, being both bovine and equestrian in nature. To put it anywhere else on the property does take away from future grazing land, and would just be more or less in the way, and again, in a area of just improper drainage. So I don't know if what we're asking for is a lot or something out of the ordinary or too much. I mean, when we initially reached out to seek counsel for this meeting, we were kind of laughed at. I was like, I don't know if this is thought to be a big deal or not. So with that being said, I am open to questions from the board.
Thank you. Does anybody have a question for?
I got one question, maybe two. You're entering into the property from the
northeast corner.
Northeast corner here.
Yes, sir.
You're coming in. Is your garage door facing the eastern property line, or is it like a courtyard type pulling in, and you're pulling in this way to the garage?
It would be, the garage entry would be facing south.
Facing south.
Yes, sir. So
you're
it would
coming in
it would
like
create
that.
kind of a courtyard area for future company as well.
So your driveway is going to be basically, it's not going to be in front, let's say on that 92-foot 6-inch line there. It's going to be in front of the house.
Yes, sir.
Coming in that way there.
So putting it, again, arbitrarily in any other spot would just create a long means of further development for safe passage in an already quite unpassable tract of land that, again, we weren't prepared for. We bought it during the dry season, and come to find out, it rains in Florida. So.
Does anybody have any other questions for the applicant? Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your time.
So we'll bring it back to us for discussion. Public. We'll open it up for the public. Anybody has any comments? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board. And
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Adam, real quick. Adam, when you give a variance on a property, and let's just say down the road a tornado comes by and tears down 50% or more of that structure, does he have to come back in and apply for a future variance again?
Oh, yeah, the variance runs with the land, and so that it allows them to, once granted, they can come back and restore within the variance limits.
Okay. And the other question I had is, you said by default, the front of that property was that north-facing property. But is there any regulation that tells him that that has to be that way? And the reason why I say that is I can find unique characteristics in this property, one by the drainage and two, I mean, unique doesn't mean that's the only lot on the planet that will be that way, but it is more unique that, first of all, he has a lot with limited access to the street. And then he does have the issue with, I believe his testimony, because I know that land out there, that, he probably has a lot of issues with getting around on that property when it gets wet. But is there any reason why that southern lot, like he can't be facing County Road 90 as his front yard? I mean, I know other properties that the houses don't face the street. So is there any issue with just calling it that's the front, and this whole thing would be a moot point at that point?
I think it's based on where the access comes in. I mean, it's addressed from 2006.
But is that a regulation, or is that just something that you're just?
Probably been in practice, I suppose. I mean, in corner lots, it becomes harder for us, but I think that, you think about any subdivision we've got, it's fairly easy to pick out, because you've got, most all will have some portion of road frontage, and I think that's probably by default. The first place we look is how do you get into the property, and that's going to be something that probably weighs most heavily on us.
But that road frontage, a lot of it has to do with the visual impact of the street and the way that house is. And a lot like this, that's no longer really even an issue anymore.
That's why I think that's what the applicant was trying to come back with, and I think that I saw some legitimacy to that, ordinarily we'd have, remember that our setbacks are pretty archaic on the front. The assumption is that, we're putting that in place because at some point later on, the government's going to come and take your land to widen the road that's in front, because it's not going to be the horse trail anymore, it's going to be the major boulevard. And we don't see a lot of that. It's never happened.
I mean, he's got 32 feet, which is bigger than most zoning areas we have already for
Yes,
a
sir.
thing in the front. I mean, I don't know if it's, I would recommend approval because the lot is unique and and there's so many other contingencies that I think all the other conditions he meets. But again, I don't know if just calling the south side of the property, the front, would be any easier at this point.
What
Sean, I
are
don't know if you have any
what
feeling
is
one way or
the
other.
side yard and rear yard setback for this area? What would they be?
50 on front and rear 25s on the sides. And so, what we'd have to do, the caution I'd have there is, that we're not making something else non-conforming in what we're doing. So I guess that then if we were going to do that, I'd be looking at the house side. And let me go back. The big justification I'd say here for having it being more either front or rear to the north or south is because you got a rectangle that's sitting north to south. So that's the other thing that I've got to say out loud, that ordinarily we would try to impose the biggest setbacks where we have the greatest lot depth, so we're not significantly impacting the lot owner. And so I'd push you towards, instead of saying it's going to be east to west on the, and again, we're talking about 5 acres, so it's really not making a whole lot of difference, but I'd push anyone in any situation to take advantage of the lot area they have. And if they had any option to designate one or the other, I'd go with the longer, the depth would be where my greatest setbacks are happening.
Could I ask Sean if you had any feeling one way or the other about how the application is presented to us tonight, and whether or not calling the other thing another side, the front, would be any more problematic or less problematic than giving a variance?
Not having thought through it, I'm a little hesitant to recommend deviating from our normal practice. I think the front is going to be how it's addressed. That would solve it, but we've already come this far, and
Okay. All right, then I will make a recommendation that he meets the criteria and that recommend for approval.
Second.
Okay, so we'll bring it back for discussion. We have a motion to approve and a second. Do we have any further discussion? Nope. Okay, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Application 3384 is approved. We are up to item number 8, quasi judicial requiring disclosure of ex parte communication. Does anybody have anything to disclose on 3388? No, sir.
No.
Variance for lot coverage in the R1 Rural Residential District. Adam, can you please?
Yes, sir.
Present us with that.
This was the one, what did come up a bit, where we mentioned kind of lot of record implications that would arise later in the meeting. So this is what we were talking about when that comment was made. This is in Beachside, 17 Beachside Drive, and you can see it's part of a stretch of lots that are basically in the middle of this subdivision that hadn't developed before. There is a spot of flood zone that you'll see here in a moment. And what this is looking for, R1 zoning here, Flume first is residential low-density rural estate, which would require a minimum size of 1 acre. And we don't have that for any of the lots on Beachside. Deerwood to the north has the mixed-use low. Again, I can't tell you why. Maritime Estates is our subdivision that we're talking about. And so then here's our zoning. And so each of these lots along Beachside requiring a minimum of 1 acre, none of them having that. And so automatically, when the zoning was put in place, we created nonconformities. They're all nonconforming. Single-family dwellings are the only permitted use that are allowed on nonconforming lots of record. So and then here's our flood zone consideration. And that, I think, is coming into play here more than anything else. When we talk about lot coverage, we're talking about the area under roof that's happening here. Pomelo fine sand being the sand designation, the sand type, and then the wetland area. This isn't part of a wetland, but you do have some wetlands kind of around it. sand, then again, not really giving us consideration there of any wetlands that are present. This is in your packet. This talks about that kind of the pervious, impervious calculations. I included it here just for purposes of demonstrating that they're meeting the pervious, impervious. But what we do have in play here is that 36% lot coverage. Lot coverage being the area that's under roof. And so if this variance was approved, it is something that the board can consider as a variance. It's a dimensional requirement that's listed in the R1 zoning district where we have a 30% cap on your maximum area of lot coverage. The proposal here with the home that was submitted has that exceeding that by that 36% and change. The contractor wasn't aware of it. Looks like it. The owners weren't aware of that cap. They designed their home and then came in with a building permit, and then were told at zoning review that that exceeded the lot coverage that was within the R1 zoning district. The applicant has come back and said, look, the really what comes into play here is that non-conforming lot. More than anything else here is that all that R1 zoning that's in place requires a 1 acre. None of these have 1 acre. That's a justification that they're offering up here. And then they also said then, as part of that, by the way, we're not exceeding any of the impervious limitations that are here on this. We've talked some, and you saw it mentioned in the staff report. I'm concerned about the use of fill on this just because of it being a flood zone, small lot. Anytime we're talking about coverage or impervious, it always makes me nervous. You know, I'd rather have it be a stem wall with minimum fill, but in reality, they are meeting the pervious requirements that are here. And so the applicant's attempting to say that, you know, and I think it has made a case for it that, you know, this is because of it being non-conforming, that's the problem. That's why the house that is being proposed couldn't be placed there otherwise, because of the less than 1 acre lot size at the 12,000 square feet, 12,960 square feet. Again, just for record, before the fact variance. So we're not looking for forgiveness with this. This is based on a permit application coming in showing this larger footprint for the home. If it is approved, there would be no accessory buildings that could follow. So the lot coverage would be for the extent of what's here, extent of what's under roof. Nothing else could be constructed on this under roof unless something is taken away from the home, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But that is the only possibility then to add to that extra lot coverage. With that, I see that there's, in my opinion, 3 options. Again, not a surprise on these, but approval would be finding that all the criteria have been met. There are exceptional conditions, not owner-created hardship, and then justifying then the 6.28% increase above the 30% maximum lot coverage for 17 Beachside Drive. Denial would be finding that the criteria have not been met, and then finally you could opt for continuance to some future meeting for staff or the applicant to come back with some information that would help you making the decision. Submit my report for the record, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Adam on this application? Seeing none, having none, can the applicant come up and present, please?
My name is Jared, and I'm with Marcus Allen Homes. I think he summed it up pretty well, with the exception of doing a stem wall. We feel that a slab on grade, maybe with a thickened footer, would be adequate. We are going to have to bring in enough fill to get the lot to drain from back to front regardless. So making it a stem wall or a slab on grade really doesn't affect how much fill comes in one way or the other. That's all I've got.
Any questions for the applicant? Thank you, that'll be it. Come on, sir. Just
Good
say
evening.
your name.
My name's Tim Belisek. I'm the property owner, and I currently live about 1,000 meters to the south of this, Beachside Drive. I'm sorry, on Hidden Treasure Drive, Beach Haven. And I just wanted to make mention that the lots behind us that are adjacent to the rear, which would be the north end of our lot, those lots allow currently a 35% coverage build. and they're the same size, 100 by 130, just because of the zoning difference that was mentioned earlier of rural versus RC. And what Jared didn't mention is that in addition to us not exceeding the impervious coverage of the lot, we are also 50% greater in our setback on both sides of the property, 15-foot setback versus 10, which Jared assures me will be give us the capability to cause an improvement on the swales to also allow for better drainage to the street.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any comments? Comments on this? Haven't heard from staff and the applicant. Let's open it up to public comment. Any public comments? Seeing none, let's bring it back to the board. Are we ready for do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, Adam, the property immediately south of this is a parcel that we had looked at, I don't know, what, a year ago for a PUD?
Yeah, well, you mean, yeah, south of, you got some lots, and then south of this is Scenic Cove, yes, sir. Is what it's called, Scenic Cove PUD.
And wasn't one of the issues that was brought up for this subdivision is they don't have good drainage within the subdivision?
I think that's what public comments reflected, yes, sir.
Okay, but that's not an issue where this is, the drainage to the front to the street is fine, that's what they're supposed to do. He mentioned it's going to be an A-type zoning drainage, and that
Correct.
is what is required here, right?
Correct, yes, sir. Yeah, from the back to the front, yes, sir.
Okay.
Any further comments?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to approve application 3388.
Motion to approve.
I'll second it.
And we have a second motion on the table. All those in favor, before we vote, no more discussions on the motions, right? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay.
Nay.
Right, so the ayes have it. Application 3388 is approved. Next item is item number 9, which is, again, quasi-judicial, requiring disclosure of ex parte communication, application 3387. Do we have any disclosures to make on this application? Seeing none, let's go. It's a preliminary plat in the PUD district. Adam, would you please present us with the details?
Yes, sir. So this follows our action recommendation on the PUD development agreement and site development plan. Both of those are scheduled for the board hearing, board's regular meeting on September 18th. And so remembering that this is not the entirety of this parcel, it's basically that western portion, western triangle there, if you will, from that pond, basically in the center, and then due west. And so the total is going to be 63 lots on this. You can see the limits here, and even this, the mixed-use low designation for the DRI doesn't, it extends beyond the limits of the subdivision boundary. Zoning here, PUD, consistent with the DRI, and not a special flood hazard area, all within Zone X. And soils, if we want to believe them, are fine sands, some areas of depressional beyond the limits of the subdivision boundaries. We do still have some wetland impacts that are happening, but they're very minimal. You can see that small portion to the south, which I think in reality, there were larger areas that were present within the subdivision boundary that I'll talk about in just a moment. But here's the plat pages. Here's 4 pages in total. You have the cover sheet that's there, then the overall drawing, the key map that's here, and then you'll have the westernmost portion and then the eastern side. And all of these lots then consistent with the PUD development agreement and the site development plan. You have a number of tracks that are identified within this, these being consistent with the uses that are expected. Common areas, drainage purposes, access, signage, all that we've seen typically depicted, and then each with its own respective ownership and maintenance entity. And then remembering from the development agreement, minimum lot size being 4,800 square feet, then you have the setbacks that are stated within the PUD document, again, that's going to the board on the 18th. We've looked at each of the lots. They all meet the minimum requirements. Total development area, 21.24 acres, that's 63 detached lots, then at 2.97 units per acre, consistent with the limitations within the DRI development order for this parcel. And then the wetland impacts, I wanted to make sure I mentioned those here because we had some discussion at the board level about that before, but remembering that this overall development had substantial wetland areas that were set aside, wetland and upland areas in our Conservation Regional Park. And then one of the conditions with us having that conveyance of the land is that there are credits for wetland impacts provided to the developer as part of the Water Management District permitting. And so their obligation then as they move forward with each of these developments is to attempt to avoid the wetland impacts, but where necessary, and mitigation is something that cannot be avoided, have that mitigation occur, but have it be limited as much as possible. And so that's what, if anything, this demonstrates that they've attempted to do that. And irregardless of the extent of wetland impacts, they are handled effectively on site through the wetland credits that are available to them through the dedications they provided to the county. We have three options here in the board's recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. Approval of application 3387, the preliminary plat for Woodside Ormond Station, subject to no construction to commence prior to issuance of a county land development permit, no final plat approval to occur until extension of potable water and sanitary sewer from the city of Ormond Beach. And the third condition, any subdivision improvements not completed by a developer to be bonded or other surety provided consistent with the requirements of the Land Development Code. Second option for the board is recommendation for denial of the preliminary plat for Woodside Ormond Station. It should be for some cause in your recommendation for denial if you choose to do so. And then the third option would be continuance, likely to a time and date certain, again, for the applicant or for staff to come up with some answer to any questions that arise from the public hearing or from the board's discussion. With that, I'll submit my report for the record. Wait any questions for comments. Kim Buck has been diligently waiting for any presentation. I know. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Do we have any questions for staff before we go to Kim? Kim, please. I know you're dying to get out of here.
Kimberly Buck with the Island Engineering Group, 880 Airport Road. I'll just answer any questions.
I have one.
Yes.
We've seen an outpouring of local community at all these prior applications, and I'm just wondering, do they like this one, or are they just tired?
I honestly don't know. We have not heard any negative from the community, so I guess they like it.
Is the developer, one of the things that they were complaining about consistently was that they weren't being kept apprised, that the community meetings weren't taking place and that sort of thing, and they didn't know what was really coming, and they had a lot of questions because they didn't understand it. Are those meetings happening now, or?
We're trying to keep, people apprised of what's going on as far as through the homeowners association, but at this time, no. We do not have neighborhood meetings for these types of developments. They're not required, and but we do answer any questions that people have. Our doors are always open.
Okay, thank you.
But didn't we have this very lot like 3 meetings ago?
Yeah, you had it
And
from
they- Yeah, and there was the public here for that particular, but they have not followed up since then.
I believe that's correct.
Right, okay.
And we did submit, we did have public notice, you had that included in your packet, and did not have any inquiries that I'm aware of that came in for us either via email or by phone or by letter.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions for Kim, anyone? All right, thank you, Kim. So we've heard everything we've had to hear, so open to public comment. Sir, do you have anything to say? You've been
Got
there
a green
all night.
shirt on, come on.
All right, to see none, we're gonna bring it back. Do we have any further comments, I guess?
Yeah, what color shirt do they wear to Safe Hunter's Ridge? What color is that?
You know, I don't recall.
Camo. Camo, yes.
Camo? All right, so, are we ready to,
I'd like to make a recommendation for approval with county recommendations included.
I'll second that.
okay, we have a motion and a second with the recommendations to the county for approval. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. Application number 3387 is approved. Do we have additional staff comments?
Thank you for your attention. I'll again put in the recommendation to the county administrator that we double all of your salary, so thank you very much.
Okay, we'll hold.
I'll be
you
here
to-
all night. Thank you.
We're gonna hold you
No,
for
really,
that.
I'll be here all night.
Board comments? That's a no. And public comments? Open it up, sir, once again. The ball is in your court? Nope, you're gonna shut the lights off for us. Okay, thank you. So, I would like a
A
motion.
motion
adjourn.
to adjourn.
We have a second? All right, all those in favor to adjourn, say aye. All those opposed, say, you want to stay. Have a good night, guys.